I was 14 years old when this chilling event happened, during my spring break from school. It was my parents' anniversary during this particular week, so they had decided to go on a special date night a few hours north of our home. They were staying in a hotel, leaving my younger sister and me at home alone. With the house to myself for once, I invited one of my closest friends, Justin, to stay the night. He brought a ton of snacks and sodas, which we set up on the large table in the basement. We then fired up the PlayStation, our eyes gleaming with excitement for a night of gaming. We had the speakers turned up pretty loud, and we were gaming down there for 3 hours straight, completely lost in the virtual world. Eventually, though, Justin decided to go upstairs to get a glass of water. When he came back down a few minutes later, his face looked genuinely worried, drained of its usual cheerful expression. "What's up?" I asked, noticing his sudden change. He hesitated for a second, then said, "There's someone outside the house." My heart gave a little jump. He said he had seen a person standing in our backyard near the kitchen. We had a large sliding glass door in the kitchen that overlooked the yard. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me, one of his usual pranks, but his face was serious, his eyes wide with genuine concern. We both went back upstairs, slowly, and entered the kitchen. At first glance, it did not look like anyone was in the backyard. The darkness was thick. But then, as our eyes adjusted, we noticed something. There were some distinct smudges on the outside of the glass door. They looked exactly like someone might have been leaning on the glass, perhaps pressing their face against it and looking inside. That was obviously really creepy. It sent a shiver down my spine. So, I quickly shut the blinds, pulling them tight across the glass, and we did a quick perimeter check around the other windows in the house. We did not see anything else unusual, no other signs, so we figured we were all good again, trying to convince ourselves. We were both just kids after all, and did not really know how to handle something like this. We were trying to act brave. After a couple of minutes, feeling slightly more at ease, we went back downstairs and continued where we had left off with our game. Another couple of hours went by, and it had to be well into the night, like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Justin was getting really tired, his head nodding off sometimes. So, we wrapped up our last match on the PlayStation and turned it off. The basement had 2 small, comfortable couches, so we each took one and laid out some blankets. Then we turned off the lights, plunging the basement into pitch darkness, and called it a night. For some reason, I had a lot of trouble falling asleep that night. It was not like me. I would fall asleep for a few minutes, drifting off into a light doze, and then wake right back up, over and over again. I do not know why. Possibly from too much caffeine from all the sodas we drank, or maybe just the lingering unease from earlier. But it went on for a really long time. It felt like well over an hour. But then, one of these times that I woke up, something was different. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black in the whole basement, a deep, consuming darkness. But there was a tiny, faint streak of light across the other end of the room. It was almost imperceptible, a thin line cutting through the black. I sat up a bit, my eyes trying to adjust, and I could tell it was coming from the door above the staircase that led to the main floor. My heart gave a small, nervous jump. I looked over at the other couch, and Justin was still there, sound asleep, completely unaware. Did he get up at some point to get more water? No way. I thought I would not have noticed. I am a very light sleeper. I got up from my couch, feeling too uneasy to try and sleep without making sure this was nothing serious. I slowly walked over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door was indeed cracked open, but not enough to clearly see through. It was just a thin sliver. I went to the top of the stairs, my bare feet silent on the carpet, and opened the door further, just enough to peek through. The hallway light was on, casting a soft glow, and so was the kitchen light, illuminating the area where we had seen the smudges earlier. It was about then that I suddenly remembered about that man that Justin said was standing outside the house. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I walked slowly over to the kitchen to look out the back door again. The backyard was empty, as far as I could see through the dark glass. Nobody was out there. As I was about to look away, thinking I was just being paranoid, something moved. It was a fleeting movement, a quick, dark shape across the reflection on the glass door. It was inside the house, not outside. My head spun around, looking directly behind me, staring down the long, dark hall. Whatever I had just seen had quickly moved across the other end of the hallway, a shadowy blur disappearing into the darkness. I did not know what to do. My mind went blank with terror. I just stood there for a second, frozen, before pure instinct took over. I sprinted back into the basement, my heart hammering like a drum. I quickly woke up Justin, shaking him hard, and after a very quick whispered explanation, he was just as terrified as I was. His eyes were wide with fear. We scrambled, half crawling, and hid in one of the small closets down there, pulling the door shut behind us. Then, with trembling hands, we called the police. While we were waiting, huddled together in the dark closet, we could clearly hear someone moving around upstairs. It was not just quiet footsteps. It was like they were running around the house, frantically looking for something. The sounds were muffled but distinct. It got quiet after a few minutes though, a heavy, unsettling silence falling over the house. When the police finally showed up, shining their bright flashlights, the person was long gone. They found that the small bolt that locked the back door, the one we had checked earlier, was snapped off. That was how they got in. Other than that, we do not know anything about who it was or what they wanted. For several years after this incident though, every few months, we would find those exact same smudges on the back door of someone clearly looking inside. It was a terrifying reminder. It was not until we finally got a security camera installed, pointed directly at the back door, that they finally left us alone. At least, as far as we can tell. It has been over a year since we have seen any signs of them. What they wanted, why they kept coming back, is still completely unknown. The thought of it still chills me to the bone. My name is Caleb Fletcher, and I am 16 years old. This unsettling event took place around 8 to 9 months ago, specifically on the 24th of August, which was a Saturday. School had been going on for about 2 weeks, and I was already feeling the stress of classes. So, to distress a little, I decided to see if my friends, who I will call Griffin and Broly, wanted to hop on our video game Fortnite. My mom and sister were out shopping. My dad was working late, and I was bored and looking for something to do. It was around 8 o'clock in the evening when we finally managed to get online and play, mostly because I had decided to make pizza rolls beforehand and ended up burning the entire batch. After a few rounds of the game, I could tell my friends were getting tired of losing to me, so they decided to get off after only an hour. I planned on just lying down with my phone, scrolling through social media, and then going to bed. That was until I heard my 2 dogs barking loudly outside. They are usually quite calm, so their sudden barking got my attention. It is not unusual for them to bark, given how people typically walk on the side of the road near our house, but I still looked out the window anyway, just to make sure. I did not see anybody out there, no person, no car. But seconds after looking out the window, after checking and seeing nothing, I heard our garage door open and then shut, a distinct, heavy sound. That usually means my dad is home from work, but I did not see his van parked outside in the driveway. And he had texted me earlier, telling me that he would be working late tonight, much later than this. A cold feeling started to creep up my spine. I decided to walk downstairs slowly, making sure to be quiet, and went into the dining room. From the window there, I could get a better view of the driveway and the garage. From that vantage point, I could clearly see that our driveway was completely empty. There was not a person or a vehicle in sight. The garage door was fully closed. I am not the type of person to go investigate strange sounds or situations alone. So, I immediately ran back up to my bedroom, my heart starting to pound. I quickly texted my family group chat, asking if anybody was home or if anyone had just arrived. I told my mom about the garage door opening and shutting on its own. She immediately texted back, telling me in clear, firm words to turn off all the lights in my bedroom, lock my bedroom door, and stay there until she got home. So, I did just that, my hands trembling slightly as I flicked off the light switch. About 15 minutes later, as I sat in the dark, silent room, I thought I heard our wooden floor downstairs creaking. It was a very subtle sound, like someone was trying to move very slowly and sneakily through the house. I did not have anything nearby that I could use as a weapon. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. I unclipped my microphone's boom arm from my desk, a long metal rod, and quietly, very slowly, opened my bedroom door. I walked out onto our upstairs balcony, which overlooked the downstairs living room. I leaned over the railing, trying to see if I could spot anyone hiding or anything suspicious in the darkness below. It was hard to see in the dim light. Stupidly, I yelled out, "Is anybody there?" As if an intruder would really answer me. The silence that followed was deafening. I thought everything was fine, thinking perhaps I had just imagined it all, until I saw it. A large, dark silhouette of someone standing directly underneath the balcony, perfectly still, hidden in the shadows. I panicked. Pure, unadulterated fear shot through me. I ran, stumbling, to the closest room with a door, which happened to be my small bathroom, right next to my bedroom. I slammed the door shut and quickly locked it, my hands fumbling with the small bolt. The intruder must have known I noticed them, because I immediately heard loud and fast footsteps running up our stairs, heading directly towards the second floor. As I locked myself in the bathroom, a dreadful realization hit me. I had stupidly left my phone in my bedroom, which was the room right next to me. My only way to call for help was just a few feet away, but separated by a wall. After building up enough courage, forcing myself to be brave, I took a deep breath and bolted out of the bathroom. I ran quickly into my bedroom, my eyes darting around. I slammed the door shut as soon as I got in and quickly locked it. My sister's room was right across from mine, and its door was wide open. I figured the intruder must have been in there, searching. After locking my bedroom door, I grabbed my phone from my desk and quickly typed in 911. Just before I hit the call button, my eyes flickered to something. I noticed that the small storage room in my wall was open just a tiny bit, a slight crevice in the dark. My blood ran cold. I saw a dark brown eye peeking through that tiny crevice, staring directly into my soul. The pure, overwhelming terror I felt in that exact moment is something I will never, ever forget. It was like being struck by lightning. My body moved without thinking. I bolted down the stairs, not caring about the noise, and threw open my front door. I ran out into the night, sprinting up the small hill to my neighbor's house, not looking back. He was a police officer, a kind, strong man. He immediately alerted the other police officers while I stayed with his wife, who comforted me, still trembling. He then went down to investigate my house. I told him exactly where the intruder was hiding, describing the storage room in my bedroom. Minutes later, I ran back down the hill, desperate to see if the intruder had been caught. When I walked inside my house, my eyes immediately went to the living room. I saw a tall, very skinny man with a long, scraggly gray beard and a dirty black coat. He was being pushed onto the floor by my neighbor, who was now expertly getting him handcuffed. I was not allowed to be home alone anymore after that night, and we also installed much better security systems around our house. My family was just happy to know I was not hurt, and they were incredibly thankful for my neighbor's bravery. I do not wish an experience like this on anybody, not even my worst enemy. The image of that eye staring through the wall still invades my thoughts, a constant reminder of how close I came to something truly terrible. I am a manager at a medium-sized grocery store, a big, brightly lit place that usually bustles with people. I work 10-hour shifts, mostly overnight, taking care of stocking and preparing the store for the next day. At the time this happened, our store was having some major staffing issues. Pretty much every department was understaffed and overworked. The overnight stocking department was no exception to this problem. I had one guy who would help me 5 nights a week, but that was it. Other than him, it was just me. This particular night was his day off, so it was only me working alone in the vast, quiet store. I got in at 10 o'clock in the evening, and by 10:15, I was completely alone in the building. The doors locked for the night. After running some numbers in the office and checking my inventory, I started pulling out huge loads of heavy boxes onto the aisles to begin unpacking and stocking the shelves. Even though I had no help that night, I still had to get everything done by morning. So I was working incredibly hard and as quickly as I possibly could. I did not even stop for a break or anything, pushing myself to move faster and faster through the empty aisles. But suddenly, a distinct tapping sound echoed through the entire store. It was clear and sharp, cutting through the silence. I stopped what I was doing and listened carefully, holding my breath. I heard it happen again, a rhythmic, persistent sound, and it sounded exactly like someone tapping on a window at the very front of the store. I looked at my watch for the first time since I had started working. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Time had flown by while I was busy, but there was absolutely no reason anyone should be here outside the store at this hour. My stomach tightened slightly. I walked slowly down the long aisle, my footsteps echoing, and made my way to the front of the store. As I got closer, I quickly saw someone standing outside. He was leaning against a large front window, trying to peer inside, his face pressed against the glass. He spotted me as I walked up and stared directly at me when I was just on the other side of the window, a pane of thick glass separating us. I asked him, through the glass, what he wanted. The man, who looked somewhat disheveled, almost homeless, told me in a low, flat voice to open the door. He had a completely straight face, no smile, no expression at all. His eyes were cold and unblinking. I told him firmly that we were closed and that he could not be here. Then I turned to walk away, intending to get back to work. But the man immediately, and with great force, slammed his fist hard against the window. It was not a tap like he was before. This was now harsh, violent pounding. The sound was loud and startling. I looked back at him, and he was clearly enraged, his fist still pressed against the glass. Thinking this guy was crazy and possibly dangerous, I told him I would call the police if he did not leave right away. I started pulling my phone out of my pocket, making sure he could see I was serious. And only then did he slowly step away from the window. He still had that same angry, enraged look on his face as he walked away and into the dark parking lot, disappearing into the shadows. Seeing him leave, I put my phone away and tried to get back to work. We get a lot of crazy customers around here, especially during the overnight shifts, so I tried not to think on it too much. Again, I had to focus on getting my work done. There was still so much to do. I was only able to get a small cart of boxes stocked in the dairy aisle, so it was maybe 15 minutes later, a short amount of time, when a sudden, loud sound echoed sharply through the entire store. It sounded exactly like something made of metal snapping or scraping forcefully. My blood ran cold. I quickly dropped what I was doing, the box tumbling to the floor, and ran as fast as I could back up to the front of the store. Nobody was at the windows now. The front of the store was empty. So, I went up to the main entrance door. It was one of those large revolving glass doors, which uses a thick bolt lock on the top to keep it from opening when we close the store for the night. Right away, my eyes landed on the lock. I saw that the bolt was completely missing. Like, not even just unlocked, the entire metal bolt was gone. It had been forcibly removed. I pressed my hand on the glass door, and it glided around easily, completely loose, allowing anyone to get in. I could feel my face turn completely white as I realized what this meant. My heart began to pound in my ears. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I needed to call the police immediately. Someone had been in the store, or still was. I turned around quickly to go to the front office, where the phone was, but I was instantly looking into the face of that very same guy from before. He was only a few feet from me, standing silently, still having that enraged, hateful stare in his eyes. I did not hesitate for a second. Without thinking, I ran directly out the revolving door, pushing it hard, hearing the guy follow close behind me as I burst out into the parking lot. Just as I ran out into the open, an old dark van came speeding up to the front of the store. It nearly hit me as it swerved, but I just kept running, my legs burning, until I got to my car. When I rushed inside and slammed the door shut, I noticed the guy was not chasing me anymore, and the van was now speeding quickly out of the parking lot, disappearing into the night. I called the police immediately, my voice shaking, and spent the next couple of hours explaining everything that had happened. It was not until the next day that we got security footage of the man breaking inside, but the image quality was not the best. We can say almost for sure that they were trying to get me into their van, but we have no way to know why. I am sure if I had not been as quick, if I had hesitated for even a moment, I probably would not have ever been seen again. The thought still fills me with a deep, cold dread. This happened a few months ago while I was driving for a food delivery service, a side job I do maybe 10 to 15 hours a week. This particular night, I was only doing a couple of orders since it was already quite late, well past midnight. I had picked up a small order around 1 o'clock in the morning. It was to be delivered to a business building somewhere across town, which was clear from the address. This was a normal thing for me, usually for overnight workers or security guards, so I did not think much of it. When I pulled into the parking lot, though, it was completely empty. There were no cars at all, not a single vehicle in sight. And it did not look like there was a parking lot behind the building either. The place felt deserted. I parked my car in a spot near the front entrance and got out with the bag of food. The place was definitely an office building of some kind. It was smaller than most, being only 2 stories high and not very wide. All the lights were off in the windows, casting the building in darkness, except for one faint light visible from behind the front door. It was a strange, eerie glow. I walked up to the front door and checked the delivery app on my phone. It had specific drop-off instructions. Enter the main hallway and leave the bag outside of room 232. I looked through the glass of the door into the building, seeing this long hallway with a bunch of closed doors on either side, each with a number, delivering to specific rooms like this, inside a building. I had only done at hotels before, so this was kind of new for me. It felt different. I tested the door, pushing on it gently, and it was unlocked. My eyebrows furrowed slightly. Why would a business building be unlocked at this hour? I stepped inside. I expected to hear people working, moving around, or talking quietly, but instead, I did not hear anything at all. There was not a single sound in the whole building. It was just the low, constant white noise from the overhead lights buzzing above me, a faint, unsettling hum. As I passed the first few doors, I noticed they were all numbered in the 100s, like 102 and 106. The room the instructions said to leave the food at was in the 200s, so I assumed that meant it was on the second floor. In the middle of the hallway was a doorway leading to a staircase. It was held open with a simple wedge door stopper on the floor, but the lights for the stairwell were not on. It was completely dark. I stepped into the doorway and walked up to the very bottom of the staircase, then looked up. The entire stairwell was pitch black, a deep, consuming darkness. Not even any light was coming from above, from where the room was supposed to be for me to drop it off at. Again, I started to notice the eerie silence. It was not just quiet. It was dead silent, and it sent a deep chill through me. My gut feeling started to scream at me that something was very wrong. I was always one to do whatever the instructions said, so I would get good reviews and tips. But this was the very first time I told myself that this was simply too sketchy. It felt dangerous. I stepped out of the dark stairwell and back into the main hallway. And just as I did, the door directly across from me, which had been closed, suddenly opened slowly. The lights in that room were completely off, so it was just a dark void behind the door. But then, a man emerged slowly from behind the door and stepped into the hallway. He was wearing street clothes, just a regular t-shirt and jeans, and he just did not look like an office worker at all. He looked out of place, but he stood in front of me and pointed past me, towards the dark stairwell. 232 is up there, he said, his voice flat and motionless. I nodded, my heart starting to pound, but I did not move, and neither did he. He just stood there, staring me directly in the eyes with a look like he was actively suppressing a deep anger. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. After an intense few seconds of this silent stare, a moment that felt like an eternity, I could not take it anymore. I dropped the bag of food onto the ground with a soft thud and started quickly walking, almost running, towards the exit. The man did not follow me immediately, but as I left the building, I heard his footsteps go into the stairwell and then begin to go up the stairs, moving quickly. I got into my car as fast as I could and sped away. I did not know what that was, or if I was maybe overreacting about it, so I did not call the police right away. I just wanted to get home. The following day, though, the police actually called me. Apparently, the office building had reported a break-in during the night, and in the CCTV footage, they had seen my car and my license plate, tracking it back to me. They also had clearer footage of the break in itself, and so they called me in to question me about any information I might have had. I did not have much to give them, but it turned out there were actually 3 people who broke inside the building. One was downstairs, who I saw, but the other 2 were clearly shown on the cameras to be hiding at the very top of the stairs, seemingly waiting for me to go up. Disturbingly, several other food delivery orders were made to that same office building that night. All of the other drivers were smarter than I was, though, leaving the orders outside by the front door. What would have taken place in that office, had any of us gone up to the second floor, is completely unknown. But the thought sends a chill down my spine. Hopefully, the police can find the 3 men before anyone else falls victim to their terrible intentions. I still wonder what they were planning to do to me up those dark stairs. I go camping with my dad every summer. He has done it his whole life, an activity he truly loves, and recently, I have gotten into it as well. I am 16 years old now, and last year, my dad and I went out on our seasonal camping trip. We found the spot online together while looking for a new camping area to try out for the summer. There were no pictures of the specific area, but the map was easy to follow, and the description of the trail said it was easy and uncrowded. It sounded perfect. We set out on a Friday morning, packing our truck on the side of a quiet, secluded road and beginning our walk down the narrow trail. After the first quarter mile, it was very clear that the description we read online was not very accurate at all. The trail was actually pretty steep in some parts, making us breathe hard, and a lot of the path was muddy or completely overgrown with thick bushes, which made it actually really hard to walk. It was already a struggle. Being there already, though, we just pushed through the difficulty, determined to make it to our campsite. Eventually, after a challenging 2-hour walk, we got to the campsite. It looked no different than the woods on the trail that we had been walking on. There were tall, dense trees everywhere, a thick forest surrounding us, and just a small plot of overgrown grass where we could set our stuff up. There were no cool views of a lake or mountains or anything exciting. We pitched our tents quickly and then made a simple lunch, settling into the quiet of the woods. My dad was a bit of a talker, so for the rest of the day, we were just in constant conversation, sharing stories and jokes. Once the sun was starting to set, casting long, strange shadows through the trees, we walked around the trees near the campsite and collected some dry sticks and fallen branches to make a fire with. We needed a good blaze to keep warm as the temperature dropped. In the middle of us talking, our voices carrying through the quiet woods, we were suddenly interrupted by a very loud voice from behind us. It was a man's voice, raw and filled with pain. We both stopped talking immediately and spun around quickly, our eyes searching the trees. The woods were suddenly silent again, a heavy, unsettling quiet, and we did not see anyone there. Nothing. It sounded not too far away though, like maybe a mile out, through the dense trees. Neither of us said anything for 30 seconds, just staring intently at the trees, trying to spot any movement or hear anything else. We held our breath. Then it came again. Someone, a man's voice, yelling. It was a desperate sound. It sent cold chills through me. There was a clear pain and harshness to the scream, like they were in deep trouble or being hurt. I looked up at my dad. His face was really conflicted and worried, his brow furrowed with concern. He slowly turned me around and led me back to the campsite. He quickly started the fire, his movements urgent. The screams kept coming though, echoing through the darkening forest, sharp and agonizing. Eventually, I could not take it anymore and asked my dad if we should help them, my voice small and uncertain. I could tell my dad was thinking of every possible option, weighing the danger. He faced me, his expression very serious, and told me to stay by the fire and wait. He said he was going to run a little ways toward the voice, just to see what he could see, just to check. And he told me very clearly that if I saw anyone, to not let them near me. I agreed, my heart pounding, and watched him run toward the man's voice, disappearing into the dark, thick trees. After a minute, he was completely out of sight. Honestly, I was not sure what I would have done if I were in my dad's shoes. Leaving someone in need of serious help would make me feel horrible, a deep guilt. But we were also deep in the middle of the woods, far from any help. If something happened, well, I did not know what would happen. The thought was terrifying. After 10 long minutes of sitting alone by the growing fire, listening to the fading screams, I started to get really worried. The sun felt like it was dropping very fast now, almost gone, and there was still no sign of my dad. The forest was getting darker and darker, shadows stretching like long fingers. But then, suddenly, the screaming stopped. The entire forest was now completely quiet again. A heavy, oppressive silence. I wondered if my dad had found him and was helping him, or if something else had happened. Still, after another 10 minutes, my dad was nowhere in sight. With the blanket of darkness starting to cover the forest completely, I grew more and more nervous. My heart hammered in my chest. I stood up slowly and walked a little bit away from the campsite, moving cautiously towards where my dad had gone. There were still no signs of him, just the dark, quiet trees. So I walked a little more, pushing deeper into the woods, calling his name softly. Then finally, I heard it. Footsteps. Coming from up ahead. I still could not see anything in the deepening gloom, but as the sound of his steps started getting closer and closer, an eerie, almost disturbing feeling came over me. It was not just regular footsteps. There was something unsettling about them, a strange rhythm. Then, just before I thought they would come into my sight, a voice to my left, from a different direction than the footsteps, called my name. It was my dad. He was running toward me, his voice filled with urgency and worry, yelling at me to go back to the campsite. There was clear urgency and deep worry in his voice, so I hurried, stumbling back towards the campsite as fast as I could. My dad followed closely behind me. He quickly started to pack the essentials into his backpack, moving with frantic speed. The look on my dad's face is something I still remember vividly, even now. It was complete fear and deep distraught. His eyes were wide, his face pale. We left the tents behind, running for the first mile, our feet pounding on the soft earth, then fast walked the rest of the way back to our car. We did not stop until we were safely in the vehicle, driving away. On the long drive home, I asked him what he saw out there, who the man was, and why he was screaming. My dad said nothing. He just stared straight ahead at the road, his face a mask. Even to this day, he never brings it up or says anything of what he saw. Every time I so much as mention that day, his entire demeanor changes, and his face falls flat, becoming unreadable. So I just stopped asking. All I can think about now are those strange, unsettling footsteps that I heard walking towards me in the dark, and what would have happened if my dad had not shown up in time. I still wonder what he saw that day that made him so afraid. I was out camping in a familiar part of the forest near my city. My city is small, and honestly does not have much to do, so camping is the one thing I found that I really enjoy doing. I am not a big fan of hiking though. I prefer the more relaxing aspects of camping, like sitting by a crackling fire and having no responsibilities, just being out in nature. The trail I went on was one I had been to plenty of times before. It was only about a 30-minute walk from the parking area, and the campsite itself was right by a calm lake, which I loved. Having only my small city near this forest, there are only so many people that could possibly be camping at the same time and place as I was. It was usually pretty quiet. But this time, when I arrived at the campsite, I noticed the man had a tent already set up. It was a small green tent, barely visible among the trees. I could see him down by the lake, walking slowly in the sand at the water's edge. He looked like he was in his 40s, perhaps, with some generic swimming shorts on and a stained white t-shirt. I walked a little further from where his tent was, finding a spot that felt a bit more private, then set up my own tent. I then collected some large stones from nearby, gathering them carefully and placed them in a ring, preparing the area for the campfire I was going to have later that evening. As I did this, I slowly started to notice the man looking at me. It was not just a quick glance. He was standing down by the lake with his body turned completely towards me, and he was actively watching me, just standing there, unmoving. I tried my best to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing, but every time I looked back up, he was in that exact same spot, still staring intently at me. It started to get really creepy. The hair on my arms stood up slightly. So, I ended up waving at him, a friendly gesture, to see if he was perhaps wanting to say hello or something. But after I waved, he simply turned around slowly and continued walking along the lake as if nothing had happened. Whatever that was, I did not like it. It gave me a very uncomfortable feeling about that guy. So, I tried to keep an eye on him for a while, staying aware of his movements. Nothing else really happened for the next 20 minutes. He just walked along the lake. But then, after that time, he walked away from the lake and into the forest directly behind his tent, disappearing into the thick trees. I thought there might have been a trail back there, or he could have just been walking around. But whatever the case, I was just glad he was gone for now. I put my camping chair down by the lake and relaxed, trying to shake off the strange feeling. I was down there for an hour or so, enjoying the peace and quiet, before picking my chair back up and moving it back to my tent. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, so I lit up my campfire, watching the flames dance. As I sat there, looking around at the forest, I suddenly spotted something far out among the trees. It was a faint shape next to one of the trees. I squinted my eyes, trying to get a clearer view, trying to make sense of the distant form. All I could clearly make out was what looked like a white shirt. It was that guy again. And he was just standing far behind my campsite, hidden in the shadows, staring directly in my direction. Now this was getting really creepy. How long had he been watching me for? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I immediately moved my chair to the other side of the campfire, so that I was now facing him, just so I did not lose sight of him. I needed to see him to know where he was. He stayed there for a good 30 or 40 minutes, just watching me from far out in the forest, completely unmoving. Then it started to get dark out, the light fading fast. The shadows everywhere started making it hard to see him anymore, blending him into the trees. And after a while, I could not even clearly make out his shape. I could only look in the general direction he was in, a faint outline in the gloom. Yet, with my campfire brightly lighting up my entire campsite, I knew he could still clearly see me. Knowing he was still out there, staring at me, yet not being able to see anything but his general direction, I started getting really anxious. My heart pounded in my chest. I mean, what the hell was this guy doing? He had a tent here, like he was camping, but in the hours that I had been here, I never once saw him go to it. He just seemed to be watching me. With everything getting to my head, the fear and the confusion, I debated packing up all my gear and leaving right then and there. But at this point, I was worried the guy would follow me out of the forest if I tried to leave in the dark. So, I decided to stay. I sat there, tending the fire, making sure it did not go out, and I just waited, watching the darkness. Several long, tiring hours passed. The night felt endless. I did not see anything. He never came back to his tent, or came close enough for me to clearly see him again. When the sun finally started coming up, casting its first pale light through the trees, I looked all around, searching every shadow. I saw no signs of him anywhere. As soon as there was enough light to see clearly, I packed up all my gear as fast as I could and booked it back to my car, practically running the entire way. It is hard to know the guy's true intentions. If I had not stayed awake and been cautious of him from the start, who knows where I would be right now. The thought still makes my skin crawl. I was taking a few days off from work and spending it camping deep in the woods. I was in some dense forest a few hours from my town and had set up my camp at the very end of a 4-hour trail, a long walk that wound through the trees. I had spent the night there already, and on my first morning, I had noticed this thin, barely visible path leading out from the campsite, disappearing into the deeper woods. I had no idea where it went, and it certainly was not on the map of the area that I had brought with me. But having nothing better to do on that second day of my trip, with time to spare and an adventurous spirit, I thought I would go for a short hike down the path. I was just curious to see if it led anywhere cool, maybe a small pond or a hidden waterfall, or something interesting that was not on the map. I brought with me a small backpack with some food and water, just in case I would be out longer than I expected. The sun was shining, and the air was crisp. Walking through the trail, it was very obvious that almost nobody used it, or at least had not used it in a very long time, maybe even years. It was incredibly thin and overgrown in a lot of sections, with tall weeds and thorny bush trying to reclaim the path. And I did not see any signs of other people, like clear shoe prints or discarded trash or anything that would suggest recent passage. This went on for several long miles, taking around 2 hours of steady walking before I finally found the end. And it was not what I expected at all. There was a house, or a small cabin, sitting silently in the middle of the dense woods. At first sight, there was no mistaking that it was completely abandoned. Thick moss and long, winding vines were growing out of the old wooden siding, clinging to the walls, and the doors and windows were all wide open, like vacant eyes staring into the forest. Before approaching any further, I stopped and looked around at my surroundings, just checking for anything unusual, as this was not a normal thing to just stumble across in the middle of nowhere. The woods were strangely calm and unsettlingly still. There was no breeze, no bird calls, just an eerie quiet. I walked slowly up to the doorway and poked my head in, looking down the front hallway. There was thick dust and debris lying all over the wooden floors, a thick layer of neglect, but it was otherwise barren, completely empty. No furniture, no belongings. I went in a little further, creeping through the silence. It smelled strongly of mildew and rotting wood, a damp, musty smell. As I crept through the empty rooms, there was not much to see, just more dust and decay. Feeling an increasing sense of unease, a prickling sensation on my skin, I was about to turn around and leave, feeling like I had seen enough. But then, a small glimmer caught the side of my eye. It was on one of the closed wooden doors inside the cabin. The door handle had been completely ripped off, leaving a rough hole, and in its place was a shiny silver padlock. It almost looked brand new, gleaming in the dim light, and it matched nothing else in the old, ruined house. My curiosity immediately surged, and my mind started racing, wondering why there was a new sturdy padlock on the door to an otherwise empty and completely ruined cabin. What could possibly be behind that locked door that needed to be so securely kept? The more I looked at it, though, the more that uneasy feeling just took over me. It grew stronger, a deep sense of dread. I could not get myself to investigate further, to touch the lock, or even to try and look through any cracks. My instinct told me to get out. I quickly left the house and went back to the thin path, my steps quickening. Just as I entered the trail again, stepping from the house onto the familiar path, I heard a single, distinct footstep on the wooden floor inside the abandoned house. It was clear, unmistakable. I instantly turned and looked back at the doorway, my heart pounding, but I saw nothing. The entrance remained empty. So, I kept on walking, moving faster now, trying to distance myself from that strange, unsettling place. As I walked back, though, for the entire 2 hours of the journey, I kept hearing footsteps in the distance behind me. It was a faint sound, like someone was following me, keeping a careful distance. The trees densely covered the area though, making it impossible to see that far back into the woods. My vision was limited. When I finally got back to my camp, thoroughly exhausted and deeply unnerved, I immediately got a fire going early, making sure it was big and bright, and just sat and waited, listening and looking to see if anyone would show up. By nightfall, I had not heard anything else, and I started to relax slightly, hoping I had imagined it. But as the hours got later and the darkness deepened, I started hearing it again. Footsteps. Out in the distance, far beyond the warm light of the campfire, but definitely close enough for them to see my light. It was a slow, deliberate sound. It went on for several hours, hearing a line of footsteps every 10 to 15 minutes, a chilling rhythmic presence in the night. Still though, I was never able to actually see them. Eventually, it got so late, and I was so tired that I knew I had to sleep. So, I left the campfire going, its flames dancing as I got inside my tent and zipped it closed. I was in and out of sleep for the rest of the night, waking up at every small sound the woods made, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. After getting almost no sleep, I packed up my camp as soon as the sun rose and left. What the cabin was doing there, and whoever had followed me that night, I will never know for sure. I cannot say what they intended to do, but their disturbing, persistent stalking behavior only lets me assume the very worst. But I can never seem to stop thinking about the disturbing possibilities of what was truly behind that locked door, hidden away in the deep, silent woods. There is an old, abandoned hotel in my town that has been vacant for decades. It stands like a decaying monument to a forgotten past. It had been bought out several times before by different investors, but every single time, they ended up going bankrupt after just a few short years of trying to make it work. Our town is small and kind of old-fashioned, a quiet place, so there is really no reason for anyone to visit unless they have family here, which means that there's truly no reason to even have a hotel as big as this one was. It was at least 6 stories tall, a towering structure, and was probably the largest building in our entire town, standing out against the smaller, older buildings. Anyway, when I was 23 years old, feeling a bit bored and adventurous, I just casually decided to check it out one day. I had heard stories about it, but I did not really believe them. I felt like there was nothing actually dangerous or truly scary about it. It was just an empty, abandoned building that would be cool to walk around and look at, a bit of local history. I decided to go during the day, figuring that if anyone else was there during the daytime, then they were probably just harmless people exploring it, just like me. I parked my car at a store that was a half-mile away, wanting to be discreet, then walked the rest of the way to the hotel. It was mostly isolated on the side of the road, a lone structure, being that most of the stores surrounding it had already been torn down or had gone out of business. The hotel itself, though, looked a lot worse than the last time I had seen it. The brick was crumbling in many places, and the whole place seemed like it was fading and decaying, slowly falling apart. I went up to the front entrance and glanced inside through a broken window. It was mostly empty, a large, hollow space, with only a few things scattered around, like broken chairs and old, dusty furniture, barely visible in the dim light. I stepped in through a gaping hole in the wall and walked slowly through the lobby, my footsteps echoing loudly. I then found a door to the staircase and opened it. The whole stairwell was covered in deep shadows, a dark, winding tunnel, as barely any light was getting in from outside. All I could see was a dim beam of light coming from one of the floors above, filtering through some unseen opening. It was only just enough light for me to find my way up the stairs, placing my feet carefully on the dusty steps. But when I got to the door on the second story, it was blocked. Something on the other side was keeping it from opening, a heavy weight pushing against it, and the large sheet of wood was covering the window on the door, making it impossible to see through. I left it and continued up to the third story, pushing the heavy door open and entering the long hallway. This was probably the most creepy setting I had ever been in. The hallway was incredibly dark and smelled strongly of must, a heavy, stale odor. There was only a small window on either end of the long corridor to let in any light, leaving the middle section in deep gloom. I walked down a little bit, cautiously, then went into the first room with an open door. Oddly, it looked kind of normal. There were thick layers of dust covering everything, but all the furniture was still set up as if it had never been moved. There were even old towels and bars of soap left in the bathroom, strange relics from a past life. As I was looking at all of this, taking in the eerie silence, I heard a small, distinct thump. It sounded like something had been dropped, or like a heavy footfall. I instantly turned around and faced the doorway, my heart quickening. I was not sure if that sound was from the floor I was on or the one directly below me. A few seconds later, quiet footsteps began to creak the floorboards, coming down the hallway, slowly, deliberately. As they got closer, I just stared intently at the doorway, hoping, praying that they were not on my floor. My breath hitched in my throat. After a few tense seconds, a deep silence fell again. Then I heard them stop, followed by the sound of a door opening, and then slamming shut on the floor below me, a loud, echoing bang. Afterward, there were no more footsteps, or really any sounds at all. The silence was unnerving. I tried to be very quiet, walking up to the hallway and peering out, trying to make sure nobody else was here. Thinking about it though, I could not see why another person, just exploring the place, would walk so deliberately to a room and then slam the door shut like that. It made no sense. The more I thought about it, the more nervous I got. The fear started to build inside me. Only adding to the eeriness was how completely silent the whole place was now. A heavy, oppressive quiet. After a minute of standing in the hallway and thinking, I had had enough. I quietly walked back to the staircase, moving as softly as I could, and opened the door. I entered the dark stairwell, its gloom even deeper now, and started to descend the metal steps. There was no way to be completely quiet on the metal stairs. Each step I took was an unavoidable hollow thump, echoing loudly in the enclosed space. But as I passed the door to the second story, the one that had been blocked before, I noticed a small gap in the doorway that definitely was not there before. It was just a sliver of light, but it was enough. Then I looked down at the stairs ahead of me. A figure stood silently in the stairwell, only a few steps below me. They were barely visible in the deep darkness, a shadowy shape, but their eyes stared directly at me. They looked dreadful and completely emotionless, cold and empty. With no other choice, with nowhere to go but down, I started carefully walking on the very edge of the staircase, hugging the railing, passing by them with only a couple of feet between us. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought they could hear it. Their eyes, those dead, empty eyes, followed every single move I made. Once I got to the bottom of the stairs, I threw open the door and ran out into the lobby, where I could finally see clearly in the faint light filtering through the broken windows. I hurried back to my car, got in, and sat in the parking lot for a while, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, just trying to calm down. Looking back, that was probably the dumbest thing I had ever done. I guess I just did not realize what I was walking into. I am not sure why that person was there, or what they were doing in that dark, abandoned hotel, but leaving when I did was probably the only good decision I made that day. The memory of their silent, staring eyes still chills me to the bone. I was driving back from my friend's place in northern Wisconsin. I live right outside of Chicago, which is about a 6-hour drive, a long, monotonous stretch of road. So, I decided to do it all in one go, without stopping overnight. However, I did not anticipate leaving my friend's place so late in the day. I was not even on the road until 8 o'clock in the evening. But I absolutely had to be home for work the following day, so there was no option to hang out any longer or stay the night. If you are not familiar with Wisconsin, especially the northern parts, it is mostly flat land with a ton of dense forests all over, and small towns scattered throughout. The biggest cities are closer to the Illinois border, nowhere near where I was. My buddy's place was in one of these very small, remote towns, so pretty much right out of the gate. It was barren forest roads stretching for miles. There were a few cars here and there for the first little while, but once I was 30 minutes out and the sun had completely set, there was not a single other car on the road. I probably went a whole 2 hours without seeing anyone else. The endless flat forest on either side of me was so repetitive that it was making me incredibly sleepy. The trees blurred into a dark, continuous wall. It definitely did not help that I was so tired from hanging out with my friend all weekend either, exhausted from all the fun. I was trying everything to stay awake, singing along to the radio, rolling down the window for fresh air, drinking cold coffee. But at just around 11 o'clock at night, through the thick darkness, I actually saw something up the road ahead. I opened my eyes a bit wider, forcing myself to focus, and could clearly tell it was a person. They were standing on the shoulder of the road, a lone figure in the dim glow of my headlights, and had their thumb out, clearly looking for a ride. For some reason, the very first thought that came through my mind was that having company in the car would surely help keep me awake. It was a strange thought, not something I would normally consider. I almost instinctively began slowing down, my foot lifting from the gas pedal. As I got closer, they started walking down the shoulder towards my car. I rolled the window down, the soft hum of the electric motor breaking the silence, and pulled up next to them. "Hey, I just need a ride into the next town, if you've got a spare seat for me," the man said. It was really dark out, and I could not see much of him, just a shadowy shape. But he sounded tired, his voice a little hoarse. I nodded, a quick decision made without much thought, and let him into the back seat. It was not until I started pulling away, leaving the deserted stretch of road behind, that the thought even popped into my head about why he was out here in the first place. I mean, the middle of the woods in the middle of the night was kind of a weird place to be for someone just casually walking. I looked in the rearview mirror. The guy was looking at me through the deep shadow that covered the back seat. He looked like he was in his 30s, with some stubble on his face and a short buzz cut. But I did not see a backpack or anything with him, no luggage at all. "So what brought you out here?" I asked him, trying to sound friendly. I told him I was at my friend's place for the weekend and was heading back home to Chicago. Then I asked him the same question. His straight face, which had been unreadable, turned into a strange fake smile, a forced, unnatural expression. "Oh, I was just walking on a trail in the woods and got lost along the way," he said, his voice a little too casual. "Found the road and figured it best to catch a ride." I thought about his answer for a second. I did not know about any trails, or really anything at all, in these specific parts of the woods. This area was mostly dense, unbroken forest. But even if there was a trail, he would have had to drive to get here. Why did he not mention that? Wouldn't he want me to take him to the trailhead instead of just into town? It did not add up. I do not know. I was more awake and aware now, and the situation was starting to make me feel very uneasy. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious it all seemed. But then, the guy suddenly told me to stop. He said it abruptly, his voice firm. He told me to pull over right here and drop him off. I cautiously did as he said, my foot hitting the brake. I pulled the car onto the shoulder of the road and parked. We were maybe 5 miles down the road from where I had picked him up, and there was still nothing but dense, dark forest all around us. The guy quickly opened the door without saying another word. He started rushing away, heading directly for the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I was super weirded out and very concerned about this whole thing. At this point, I just wanted to get out of there, away from him, as fast as I could. But he had left the door open, a wide, gaping hole. When I leaned into the back seat to shut it, my eyes scanned the floor. I noticed a drawstring bag tucked under the passenger seat. It was not mine. It was definitely his. My heart sank. I called out for the guy. "Hey, you left your bag." He turned around slowly, a shadowy figure at the edge of the trees. He stood with a straight face and wide, frustrated eyes, staring at me for several uncomfortable seconds. The silence was heavy. Then, he slowly came back towards the car. "Your bag." "You left it right here," I said, pointing under the seat. He hesitated for another several seconds, his eyes still fixed on me, before he suddenly grabbed it abruptly, almost snatching it, and turned around again, hurrying back into the forest. I reached over quickly and shut the door with a loud thud, then left the area as fast as I could, speeding down the road. I was relieved to be away from that guy, knowing that something was definitely up with him. But it was only a few minutes down the road that I started to pick up on an awful, pungent odor coming from the back seat. It was a terrible smell, like something rotting. It got increasingly worse over the next 30 minutes, growing stronger and more sickening until I got into another small town. I immediately stopped at a gas station, pulled into a dark corner, and used my phone light to look into the back seat. On the carpet, under the passenger seat, right where the drawstring bag had been sitting, there was a deep red stain. It was dark and sticky. I almost threw up from the shock and the smell as I ran into the gas station convenience store and called the police. I gave them all the information I had on what had happened. They cut out the piece of carpet from my car to get it tested, to identify the substance. They also did a search for the man, following the faint trail I described, but came up empty-handed, only finding a few footprints near the spot I picked him up at. I do not know exactly what was in that bag, but it seems like he was trying to plant it in my car, a terrible means to cover something up. We still have no idea who he was or what he was up to that night. The memory of that stain and the empty look in his eyes still gives me nightmares. I was working a quick food delivery shift on a Monday night, trying to earn some extra money. I got out of my day job at 7 o'clock in the evening and decided to make a few deliveries before heading home. It was a pretty regular, quiet night with nothing much to note. The roads were mostly empty and the orders came in steadily. I delivered about 7 or 8 orders before I took my very last one for the night. I drove it down to the house, parked, and dropped it off at the front door, then started heading back into town where my apartment was. It was around 10 o'clock at night now, and after that last delivery, I was about 20 minutes out, deep in the farmland that surrounds our town. The roads were dark and lined with endless fields. A couple of minutes into my drive back, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road ahead of me. It was a shadowy silhouette against my headlights. I slowed down cautiously, and the man moved over a little bit, but not enough to be completely out of my way. Once I got closer, he looked directly at me and stuck his thumb out, a clear sign he was hitchhiking. In my headlights, I could tell he was an older guy, like in his early 50s, and he had a large, bulky backpack over his shoulders. Since I was already slowing down and heading in the direction of town anyway, I figured I would be helpful and ask if he needed a ride into the city. He leaned on my windowsill, his face tired, and thanked me for stopping. His eyes looked heavy and exhausted, as if he had not slept in days, but he seemed nice enough, his voice calm. So, I agreed to give him a ride. What I was not expecting, though, was for him to immediately open the passenger door and sit right in the seat next to me. He did not ask permission, he just did it. It did not really matter, I guess, but I felt like it was usually common courtesy for hitchhikers to get in the back seat, especially with a stranger. As he got situated, putting his backpack on the floor between his feet, I looked past him at where he had come from. It was a vast field of tall grass, just a huge farm or something, stretching out into the darkness. "You from around here?" I asked, trying to start a casual conversation. "What brings you out to the farmlands?" He looked over at me, his tired eyes meeting mine. "Just making my way across the country to visit my family," he said. "Don't have a car, so I've been hitching rides." I thought that was pretty interesting, a long journey. So, I asked more about where he was from, but he gave me very vague and uninterested answers, almost like he did not want to talk about it. A couple of times, I caught him looking into my back seat. Not just quick glances, though. It was like he was slowly running his eyes through the whole back seat, looking for something specific, searching. Something about this guy started to make me feel off, a growing sense of unease. He was not talking much, and he was just acting really unusual. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice a little hesitant. I still had my eyes on the road, but he did not say anything. So then I looked over at him. My eyes were immediately drawn to his disturbing stare. His gaze was fixed on something, and then I noticed it. The knife. He had it clenched tightly in his right hand, hidden low by his side. "Stop the car," he said, his voice low and firm. My blood ran cold. I did not say a word. I simply parked right in the middle of the empty road, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I was terrified, my mind racing. I just thought if I let him take whatever he wanted, my car, my money, anything, then I would get out unharmed. So, that is exactly what I was going to do. As soon as the car was in park, I turned quickly to open my driver's door, planning to jump out. But he quickly stopped me, his free hand grabbing my arm. "Get in the back," he demanded, his grip tight, still clenching the knife. I froze up for a moment. A horrifying realization hit me. We were in the middle of empty fields, completely isolated. And if I got in the back, I would probably never have another chance to escape. I would be trapped. He told me again, his voice harder this time, to get in the back. And that is also when I noticed his large backpack, which was slightly open by his feet. Inside, I could see a thick bundle of rope. My mind flashed to terrible possibilities. I had no choice but to try my luck escaping now, before it was too late. I opened the driver's door and jumped out of the car in one swift motion, my feet hitting the dirt. The man tried jumping across the front seat to grab me, his arm reaching, but I was faster. I sprinted to the other side of the road and dove headfirst into the tall grass of the field. I kept on running through the field, pushing through the thick stalks, until I felt like he could not possibly find me in the darkness. Then I stood completely still and waited, holding my breath. He yelled a few times from the road, his voice distant, but then it went quiet. All I could hear was the wind blowing the tall grass around me, a soft, whispering sound. I stood still and motionless for a good 15 minutes, every fiber of my being tense, before I slowly made my way back toward the road. I peered through the grass and could clearly see my headlights still beaming onto the pavement, and the driver door of my car was still wide open. The man was nowhere to be seen. After scoping it out for another minute, cautiously, I sprinted up and grabbed my phone from the car, then ran back into the safety of the tall grass and called emergency services, 911. I did not know if he was still hiding somewhere, waiting for me, so I did not risk staying out on the road. Eventually, the police showed up though. I could not believe the man did not drive away in my car. He must have just grabbed his backpack and run off into the other field, or maybe even tried chasing me through the grass and just did not find me. Either way, it clearly showed that his intentions were not to just rob me of my belongings, which makes the entire scenario 100 times more disturbing. I gave the police a detailed description of the man, but there still have not been any sightings of him. The memory of his eyes and that bundle of rope still sends chills down my spine. This was in the year 2016. My parents had just moved to the West Coast, starting a new chapter in their lives, and I was on my way, driving there to visit them for the first time. A lot of the way there is pretty empty, just long stretches of road with only a few gas stations spread out down the long highway, sometimes miles apart. At some point during my second night of driving, with the darkness pressing in, my check engine light suddenly came on in my car. I was not exactly surprised, because my car was old and not very reliable, often having small issues. But I was not really a car person either, and I had no clue what could possibly be going on with it. I looked up on my phone where the next gas station was. It was another 30 miles away, a considerable distance, but I really had no choice but to try and make it there. However, my car decided to make the choice for me instead. The engine suddenly cut out completely, without warning, leaving me coasting silently along the side of the road until I eventually stopped. The car came to a slow, final halt in the complete darkness. I tried everything I could to get it working again. I turned the key, pumped the gas, but nothing happened. I even got out and looked under the hood for any possible causes of the problem, peering into the dark engine with my phone light, but I saw nothing obvious. Honestly, I thought this was just the final leg of my old car's life. In the meantime, all I could do was find a way to get help. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, already feeling a sense of dread, and I immediately felt my stomach drop as I saw the dreaded no service bars. I had no signal at all. I tried a few calls anyway, dialing emergency services, but obviously none of them went through. After 30 agonizing minutes of trying everything to find a solution, waving my phone in the air, I realized I really only had one option left, which was to hitchhike a ride. I had never done it before, and I was very nervous, not really knowing what to expect. I always found it as a strange, desperate thing that I never thought I would ever have to do. I stood out there on the side of the road, bundled up against the cold, and just waited. Every 15 or so minutes, a single car would pass by, its lights quickly disappearing into the darkness, but none of them stopped for me. This went on for hours. The time dragged by, stretching endlessly. It was probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning before I saw the bright headlights of another car coming down the road in the distance. I stuck my thumb out, hoping, assuming it would just pass by like all the rest. But to my surprise, they started pulling over. It was a black pickup truck, large and dark. I could not really see the driver clearly until I walked around to the side of their car, peering through the window. He was a very skinny man with a long, thin face. This, matched with his long, stringy black hair, made him look a little unsettling. "Need a lift?" he said happily, with a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across his face. Something really put me off about this guy, a deep feeling of unease. But honestly, I was tired, cold, and this might be my only opportunity to get a ride out of here. So, I did not pass it up. I hopped in the back seat. Behind him, a small layer of separation. I felt like it would have been awkward if we did not have some small talk, so I asked him what he was up to tonight. "Just cruising on the highway," he responded, like it was a hobby of his or something. That was kind of strange, considering we were in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town. I was surprised he did not ask me what I was up to or why I needed a ride. Most people would be curious, but I tried to think of another question, just to keep the conversation going, to fill the silence. The man interrupted my train of thought, though, when he looked at me for a few seconds in the mirror, his eyes meeting mine. "You don't have any weapons on you, right?" "Just making sure I'm safe," he said, again with that odd, too wide smile of his. I said no, my voice a little shaky, thinking it was a strange question to bluntly ask a stranger. But maybe he really was just trying to watch out for himself. I do not know. But after that, I stopped talking, preferring the silence. 10 more minutes went by as I just stared out the window into the passing darkness. Then the man made a sudden sharp turn off the highway and onto a dirt road. My stomach dropped. I immediately sat up straighter and looked around, realizing this was definitely not right. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice tight with sudden fear. He shot a quick look at me in the mirror, his strange smile gone, then continued to drive without answering. I asked him again, more loudly this time, as the fear was building up rapidly inside me. "Where are you taking me?" At this point, I knew that no matter what, the very next time this car stopped, I was going to bolt and run. So, I got ready, my hand on the door handle, my body tensed. As he drove down this beaten dirt road, which was barely more than a track, suddenly a small farmhouse appeared in the dim lights ahead. Its front door was wide open, like a gaping mouth, and the whole place looked like it was decaying and falling in on itself. It was clearly abandoned and crumbling. Once we got up closer, he suddenly slammed hard on the brakes. The car jolted forward violently, throwing me into the seat, and the man instantly swung his door open and ran around to the back side door, my side. I swung my door open as well, almost falling out, and sprinted out, heading directly for the tree line towards the deep darkness of the woods. The man ran around the car and came running up behind me, his footsteps loud, but once we were in the woods, it was so dark that I could only hear his footsteps and could no longer see him, even though he was just 10 or 15 feet behind me. I took a sharp turn, ducking behind a thick tree, and held my breath, pressing myself against the rough bark. His footsteps came right up past me and continued further into the woods, searching. A whole minute passed, an eternity of silence, before I heard his creepy voice call out for me. He was repeating the same lines over and over, in the same unsettling, calm tone of voice. "Come on, let's go back. I'll give you a ride." I wasn't trying to scare you. It was extremely disturbing to hear that calm, deceptive voice echoing in the dark. Even worse, I never heard his footsteps go back toward the car, so I had no idea where he was, or if he was lurking in the dark somewhere nearby, waiting for me. I knew I had to leave, though, to get out of there. So, I started quietly walking in the direction of the main road, or at least what I thought was that direction. I really could not see anything clearly in the deep forest, but once I was deeper in the woods, far enough away that I felt a tiny bit safer, I pulled my phone out and turned the brightness on low. Somehow, miraculously, I happened to have service now. A wave of immense relief washed over me. I almost wanted to cry from the sheer gratitude. I immediately dialed emergency services, 911, and had them track the call so they knew exactly where I was. Thankfully, I made it back to the main road and met two officers there. By that time, the man and the black pickup truck were somehow gone. I do not know how he managed to get out of there without being seen by the police, who were now searching. As for the farmhouse, it was just what it looked like, some old, abandoned place. Which makes it even stranger that the man knew exactly where it was and turned into it on purpose. I have no idea what he was going to do to me in that isolated, decaying house. I am just so glad I did not have to find out. The memory of his chilling smile in that dark farmhouse still haunts my thoughts. My family owns a huge plot of land, stretching for many acres, completely full of dense trees. On the very edge of this large property, tucked away and almost hidden, they built a small cabin. Compared to the main house, which is closer to the road, the cabin feels a lot more closed off and secluded, deeper in the thick woods. This year, I took a trip up there around the end of October to see my parents and siblings, to spend some time with them. With the main house being completely full of family members, I volunteered to stay at the cabin for the few days I was there. This was the first day I arrived on the property. There was not a drivable road to get directly to the cabin, so I parked my car at the main house. All I had with me was a light backpack with my personal stuff, like clothes and a toothbrush. I was only really planning on sleeping at the cabin, not spending much time there, so I did not bother making a special trip just to drop my bag off right away. I would do it later. Around 5 o'clock in the evening, we had what I guess was a small party, as it was the first time in a while that all of us were together in one place. We had some food and drinks, laughing and sharing updates on our lives. It was a good time, full of warmth and chatter, but it definitely wore out my energy after a few hours. I started to feel very tired. Around 9 o'clock, I told him I was going to head out to the cabin for the night and get ready for bed. So, I threw my backpack on and left through the back door of the main house. The trail to get there was very thin, a narrow path winding through the trees. It was about a 10-minute walk, but I had not even thought about the dark. There were no lights or anything along the trail, so I had to put on my phone light just to see where I was stepping, holding it out in front of me. A little ways down the dark path, I randomly heard a stick snap behind me. It was a clear, sharp sound. I immediately turned and looked at the path behind me, my phone light barely illuminating anything. It was awful. I figured it was nothing, just an animal, and kept walking. Only a couple of seconds later, though, I heard it again. Another distinct sound. It was like as soon as I started walking, something behind me started walking too. The sounds were soft, but regular, as if I was being followed. "Who's out there? Alex?" "I know it's you." "Not funny, bro," I called out, hoping it was just my younger brother Alex, being annoying and trying to scare me. I knew if it was him, though, he would have been cracking up by now. laughing at my reaction. The silence that followed was unnerving. I felt really uneasy as the suspense of not being able to see anything really started getting to me. The darkness felt heavy and alive. I kept walking, moving faster now, trying to outpace whatever was behind me. I heard leaves crunch several more times as I continued making my way to the cabin. I did not turn around again, knowing I would not see anything anyway. I hoped it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Perhaps I drank a little too much at the party. Whatever it was, I did not want to be out in the woods any longer. So, I hurried, almost running, and finally made it to the cabin. I unlocked the door with a trembling hand and got inside, quickly locking it behind me with a solid click. After tossing my bag on the floor, I rubbed my face, trying to calm the stress of whatever I had just experienced. And just then, a subtle sound came from the other side of the door. It was someone turning the knob, trying to open it. My blood ran cold. Right after they figured out it was locked, they banged on it, hard. Not just knocks, like full-on hitting the door with heavy force. I almost fell over just from the jump scare of it. They kept banging on the door though, a relentless, loud pounding. With nothing else to do, frozen in fear, I walked up to the door and looked out the thin window on the side to see who it was. When I did, I saw a man. He was wearing a dark jacket and heavy boots that I had never seen before in my life. He was a complete stranger. I only looked for a moment, a fleeting glance, before his eyes shot over and met mine through the glass. They were full of pure rage, burning with anger, and he immediately followed up by pounding on the window right where my face had been. Then, out of nowhere, a voice yelled from the woods behind him, a shout from the darkness. The man paused, his eyes still wide with fury. Then he sprinted quickly in the opposite direction, disappearing into the trees. About 30 seconds later, I checked out the window again, cautiously, and saw my brother, Alex, running up to the cabin. He looked worried and out of breath. I guess he happened to see the guy come up behind me as I started walking to the cabin, following me through the woods. And after asking my parents if they knew him, which they did not, Alex immediately came running for me. To this day, we have never seen him again, and we do not know what he was doing out in the woods on our property, or why he was stalking me that night. Still, it scares the hell out of me to think about it. The memory of that rage-filled face at my cabin door will stay with me forever. I remember that night clearly. I was driving my delivery van, heading back to the depot after dropping off a last-minute package in a small town. The clock on my dashboard read close to 11 at night, and the rain was falling steadily, a persistent drumming on the roof of the van. Usually, I was done by 10, but sometimes special deliveries needed to be made after hours. My route covered vast distances, mostly empty highways where the only company was the occasional distant headlight. That night, as I drove along the dark, wet road, I saw lights ahead. Even though I was going the speed limit, I closed the distance quickly. It was an old pickup truck, moving at an incredibly slow crawl. They seemed overly cautious, almost as if they were terrified of the slick road, but their speed was just not practical. After a minute of being stuck behind them, my patience started to wear thin. I began looking for a safe moment to pass. I sped up a little, flicking on my turn signal to show my intention. But then, just as I was about to make my move, the truck suddenly swerved. It lost control completely, spinning before careening off the road. I slammed on my brakes, the van skidding slightly on the wet asphalt, and managed to pull over to the shoulder. I stayed in my van for a moment, staring out the side window at the scene. The truck had somehow narrowly missed several large trees, but it had slid down a steep slope and was clearly stuck in the mud and bushes. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Even though it wasn't my fault, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. I couldn't just leave them out there without at least trying to get help. I pulled out my phone and tried dialing 911. No signal. Not a single bar. I tried again, then a third time. Nothing. The area was notorious for dead zones. My anxiety grew. I waited another minute, watching the truck. but there was no movement at all from inside. The rain continued to pour, making it harder to see. My worry finally overcame my hesitation. I had to check on them. I got out of my van, the cold rain immediately soaking through my clothes. I walked carefully along the side of the road, the ground becoming soft and muddy as I approached the slope. I slid a bit, grabbing onto wet branches for balance as I made my way down to where the truck was. It was wedged deep in a thicket of bush, but surprisingly, it didn't look too badly damaged from the outside. I approached the driver's side door. The window was completely fogged over, making it impossible to see inside. I knocked on the glass. Then, when there was no response, I slowly opened the door. A man was sitting in the driver's seat, frantically twisting the key in the ignition, trying to get the engine to turn over. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, but he didn't say anything for several long seconds. The only sound was the rain and the clicking of the ignition. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice a little louder than I intended. "Did you want some help?" He just stared at me for another moment, his gaze unwavering. Then, his voice flat, he finally responded, "Give me a ride." I told him I could take him to the nearest gas station. I explained that it was probably the closest place with a working phone and services. I made it clear that was as far as I could go. He considered this for a while, his eyes darting around the truck's interior before he finally agreed. He stepped out of the truck, moving slowly and stiffly. I turned and started walking back up the slope towards my van, leading the way. Despite the heavy rain, he maintained that strangely slow pace, and I could feel his eyes on me. Every time I glanced back, he was just staring directly at me, his expression unreadable until I turned my head away. It was a deeply unsettling feeling, a cold prickle on my skin. I tried to tell myself he was just cautious, making sure I wasn't the creepy one in this situation. We both got into my van, and I started driving again, the wipers working hard against the deluge. I wasn't entirely sure how far the nearest gas station was, but I figured it couldn't be more than 50 or 60 miles, hopefully less. The first few minutes of the drive were filled with awkward silence. I tried to make some small talk, asking if he was hurt or needed anything, but he barely responded. I thought maybe his head was aching from the crash, or he was in shock. Either way, the lack of conversation made the atmosphere in the van incredibly tense. Every few minutes, I would glance over at him. Each time, he was staring straight ahead or, more often, directly at me. His face was devoid of any emotion, no smile, no frown, just a blank, intense stare. It made me wonder who exactly I'd picked up. Any normal person, I thought, would be overflowing with gratitude after being stranded in the middle of nowhere during a storm. This man was different. Thankfully, not long after, I saw the welcome lights of a small town appearing in the distance. A wave of relief washed over me, but as we got closer, the man's behavior only grew stranger. He began looking around frantically, his head swiveling, his eyes darting from the interior of the van to the dark, rainy landscape outside the windows. He seemed agitated, as if searching for something or someone. I pulled into the well-lit gas station parking lot. I parked the van and turned to him. "Do you need any help with anything else?" I asked, hoping he would simply get out and let me leave. He didn't answer immediately. I could feel a palpable tension emanating from him, as if he was wrestling with a difficult decision. The silence stretched, thick and heavy in the small space. I decided to break it. "Okay, well, I'm going to get back on the road now." The man took one last, sweeping look around the parking lot. Then, in a terrifying flash, he moved. He lunged across the passenger seat, forcing his body over mine, shoving me aggressively against the driver's side door. The suddenness of it shocked me to my core. I instinctively fumbled for the door handle, trying to open it and get out, but he started punching me, a barrage of blows. Just as I managed to get the door ajar, the passenger side door suddenly swung open. Before I could even register what was happening, the man was yanked away from me with incredible force. I gasped for breath, disoriented, and still not fully comprehending the attack. I stumbled out of the van, my body shaking. Standing there were two police cars, their blue and red lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Several officers were holding the man down, restraining him. They didn't give me all the details right then, but they explained that the man was a suspect in a serious crime and had been driving a stolen truck. Apparently, an officer had found the crashed truck on the side of the road and, suspecting the driver would try to get to the nearest town, had called in for other officers to stake out the gas station. They had no idea he was with me when I pulled in, but as soon as they saw him attacking me, they had rushed in to help. I didn't know if he had attacked me in a desperate attempt to steal my van, or if he had seen the police cars and somehow thought I had led him into a trap. But either way, it was a truly horrifying experience. I had known the man was strange, unsettling, but I had absolutely no idea the true extent of the danger I had been in. If those police officers hadn't been waiting at that gas station, I honestly don't know if I would be here right now, telling this story. The memory of his blank stare and the sudden violent attack still makes my skin crawl. A chilling reminder of how quickly an act of kindness can turn into a nightmare on a dark, rainy night. I still try to help people, but now, there's always that small, persistent voice of doubt, a shadow that lingers in the back of my mind whenever I see a stranded vehicle on a lonely road. This all happened to me last year. I was working the night shift at a gas station. I know it sounds like the start of every other horror story, the kind of place where weird things always happen, but when you actually work there, you never really expect it to happen to you. Most nights were quiet, boring, even. On this particular night, it was raining outside. Not a heavy downpour, but enough to make being outside without some kind of shelter uncomfortable. In weather like that, fewer people come into the convenience store for snacks or to pay for their gas with cash. So, my job often boiled down to just being there. I'd occasionally walk around the aisles, stretching my legs, trying to stay awake. But mostly I'd be on my phone, scrolling through social media feeds or playing a simple game. As I was staring at my screen, I suddenly heard a strange sound coming from outside. It was a tapping noise, distinct, on the thick glass of the front door. I looked up from my phone and saw a figure standing out in the rain. It was a man. His face was completely hidden by the deep hood of his jacket. I waved a hand, indicating that the door wasn't locked and he could just walk right in. But he didn't move. He just kept tapping, a rhythmic, insistent sound, as if he hadn't seen me at all, or perhaps didn't understand the gesture. I sighed, put my phone down, and walked over to the door. I pulled it open, offering a polite greeting. He still didn't look at me. He just walked right past me, his steps quiet on the tiled floor, and went directly to the counter. It was almost comical, the way he seemed so completely oblivious to my presence. I went around the counter and stood behind it. The man asked for a pack of cigarettes, his voice low and a little rough. He paid with cash, placing the crumpled bills on the counter. He then turned and walked out the door, moving just as silently as he had come in. As he left, I looked out the window, and that's when I noticed it. There were no cars in the parking section closest to the store, and none by the gas pumps. Not a single vehicle. The man walked off the property, reaching the road, and then continued walking along the shoulder through the pouring rain as if it was perfectly normal. My confusion deepened. I would have been far less perplexed if he had bought a gas container, or something that would suggest his car had run out of fuel down the road, or maybe broken down. But no, he just bought a pack of cigarettes and vanished into the rain. With nothing better to do, the strange encounter lingered in my mind for the next hour. It was such an odd thing, something completely out of the ordinary for a typical night shift. I tried to come up with sensible explanations, but none of them truly fit. Eventually, I gave up trying to figure it out and decided to restock some items to pass the time. As I was doing this, the familiar tapping sound came from the front door again. I walked around the aisle, peering towards the entrance, and there he was. The same man, standing outside, tapping on the glass. I walked over and opened the door again. "Are you all right?" I asked him, a hint of concern in my voice this time. He didn't respond. He just stood there, still shrouded in his hood. "You can borrow the phone if you need," I offered, trying to provide any assistance I could think of. "Down the road," he finally mumbled, his voice still rough. I peeked my head out, trying to see if there was a car in the distance, but I saw nothing. Then my gaze fell on something sitting by one of the gas pumps. It was a large red gas container. He pointed at it. "Help," he said, his voice flat. It was then that I realized he probably didn't speak much English. "Sure," I said, and walked out to the pump with him, grabbing the gas nozzle. He handed me a credit card, and I started pumping gas into the container. The man was standing behind me, just a little too close, almost as if he was trying to stay out of my direct line of sight. It made me feel uncomfortable, a cold trickle of unease running down my spine. Once the container was full, I quickly handed it over, wanting to get back inside. I started walking back towards the store doors, but the man stopped me. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm. He started speaking quickly, a string of words I couldn't understand. I pulled my arm away and started walking faster towards the safety of the doors. Just as I reached the entrance, he yelled something, a loud, guttural sound, as if he were calling out to someone else. In that same instant, as I looked through the glass, I saw another man on the other side of the counter inside the store. He was frantically shoving everything he could into a large backpack. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and then he instantly jumped over the counter. My mind registered the shock, the betrayal, but then everything went black. I woke up laying on the cold floor, a massive, throbbing headache already blooming behind my eyes. It seemed like only a couple of minutes had passed since the incident. I almost immediately understood what had happened. The man who had been outside with me, the one I had tried to help, had hit me over the head. He must have done it to help his accomplice escape. I managed to get to my feet, groggy and disoriented, and called the police. They arrived quickly and took me to the hospital. Thankfully, I had no serious injuries, just a concussion and the need for a few stitches on the back of my head. The worst part of it all was the overwhelming feeling of embarrassment and foolishness afterwards. I felt like I had been played so easily, like I had let them get away with it. The idea that I had been so gullible, so ready to help, gnawed at me for days. Honestly though, in hindsight, I am profoundly thankful that I got hit over the head and blacked out before anything else happened. The CCTV footage, which the police showed me later, revealed a chilling detail. The guy inside, the one jumping over the counter, had been holding a gun. If I had tried to stop him, if I had even shown the slightest hint that I was a threat, I could have been shot and never woken up at all. The thought still sends shivers down my spine. Now, every time I'm on a night shift, I feel a prickle of anxiety whenever I hear the door tap or see a figure approach out of the rain. The simple act of helping a stranger is now forever tainted by that night. My roommate was out of the house for the week, which meant I had the entire place to myself. It was spring break, so my college classes were also out. I had absolutely no plans, nothing I really needed to do. The whole week stretched ahead, empty and quiet. Monday started with a bang, literally. A huge storm blew through our city. This was a common occurrence around that time of year, but it always seemed to get worse every time it happened. The wind howled, sounding like a wild animal trying to tear the house apart. The trees outside looked like they were on the verge of snapping, bending almost double under the force of the gusts. Our old house shook and creaked non-stop, a constant symphony of groans and shifts. Knowing that sleeping would be impossible with all that noise, I decided to just stay awake. I turned on my game console, picking up a video game I'd been playing. I played for well over an hour, probably until a little past 11 o'clock. The storm was still raging outside, but the noise had become a familiar backdrop. Then, the doorbell rang. I paused my game, a jolt of surprise going through me. Who would be outside right now in this weather? It just didn't make any sense. I got up and walked slowly to the front door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The glass was blurred with rain, but I could clearly see the empty porch. I opened the door a crack. The wind and rain hit me immediately, a cold blast against my face. But when I looked around, I still didn't see anyone. I closed the door, pulling it shut against the storm. I thought maybe the wind had somehow rattled the doorbell, setting it off. It sounds dumb now, I know. But what else was I supposed to think? I went back to my game, but only a couple of minutes later, a huge crash echoed from the backyard. It sounded like things tumbling over, breaking apart. My stomach dropped. I immediately knew it was our patio furniture. I had left it outside, foolishly thinking the storm wouldn't be this bad. I ran over to the back door, peering through the glass. Everything was scattered around the yard, blowing wildly in the wind. The chairs were overturned. The table was on its side. I quickly pulled on my shoes and went outside, bracing myself against the elements. The wind was so heavy it would sometimes hurt when the sheets of water hit my face. I started pushing each piece of furniture, one by one, up against the back of the house, trying to secure them from the wind. I was rushing, moving as fast as I could. Then I saw someone. They were standing at the very edge of the backyard, near the fence line, just watching me. The light from the house barely reached them, but I could make out a dark, unmoving shape in the pouring rain. I looked back at them for a moment, my heart suddenly pounding. Who was out there? Why were they just standing there? The suddenness of their appearance was deeply unsettling. But the rain was relentless, and I was getting soaked and cold. I grabbed the last piece of furniture, a small stool, and ran inside, pulling the back door shut behind me. I stood there, catching my breath, watching out the back door as I dried myself off with a towel. The person was gone. The yard was empty again, just the wind and rain. Between that and the doorbell ringing, I was starting to feel a little bit nervous. I decided not to go back to my game. I sat in the living room instead, just scrolling on my phone, trying to distract myself. I was tired of being interrupted, tired of the strange things happening. After a while, my eyelids started to feel heavy. I struggled to keep them open. I grabbed a blanket from the back of the couch and laid down. I didn't feel like going upstairs to my bedroom. The storm was much louder up there anyway, making the whole house creak and groan even more. It took a while, but eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep. A few hours later, still well into the dead of night, I woke up with a jolt. A sudden violent burst of heavy wind outside had shaken the entire house. I pulled the blanket to the side and sat up, swinging my feet towards the floor, preparing to go check if the furniture outside was still where I had placed it. But just when my feet touched the ground, they were instantly soaked. The cold, wet feeling woke me up completely. I looked down. There was a dark puddle on the ground right next to the couch. Then I saw another and another, leading in a clear line across the floor, away from the back door and deeper into the house. Inside the puddles were faint, muddy shoe prints. My breath hissed in my throat. I stood up quickly, my heart beating rapidly in my chest, and backed away into the corner of the room, my eyes fixed on the trail of wet footprints. After a minute of hearing nothing but the relentless wind outside, I slowly, cautiously began to follow the shoe prints. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. They led all throughout the house. Upstairs, downstairs. They went into the kitchen, through the dining room, even up the stairs and into the hallway of the second floor. But I could clearly tell that they had entered through the back door. The back door, the one I had stupidly forgotten to lock in my rush to get out of the rain. A wave of sick realization washed over me. I quickly went to the back door and locked it securely, double-checking the deadbolt. Then I pulled my phone out, my hand shaking, to call 911. But then a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if they were still inside? What if they were still here, somewhere in the house? I stayed quiet, pressing myself into a corner of the house where I felt the most hidden, near the front door. Then I called. I whispered my situation to the operator, my voice trembling. I waited in absolute silence, straining my ears, listening for anything but the storm until the police finally arrived. When they did, they took a look around, seeing everything I had seen. The wet footprints, the unsecured back door, but they found nothing more. No one was there. Nothing was missing. They told me it seemed like a personal attack, though, because nothing had been stolen. Whoever it was had clearly focused on my house in particular. They noted that the intruder had walked right up to me while I was sleeping on the couch and seemingly done nothing but watch me. That detail was super creepy, but it didn't make much sense. If they had wanted to do something to me, they would have had the perfect opportunity right then. After some thought, this led me to a disturbing belief. Whoever it was had actually come from my roommate. They must have seen me, looked around the whole house, realized my roommate wasn't there, and then left, doing absolutely nothing to me or the property. So, if this had been a personal attack and my roommate had been home, I think things may have gone a lot worse than they had. The police left, but the feeling of violation, the lingering image of those muddy footprints, remained. For weeks, I couldn't sleep soundly. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, made me jump. I checked every lock multiple times before bed. The thought that someone had been in my home, watching me sleep, was a terror that burrowed deep into my mind. And the chilling uncertainty of why they were there, and for whom, stayed with me, a dark cloud hanging over my sense of safety. I still live in that house, but the quiet solitude I once enjoyed has been replaced by a constant, quiet vigilance. I was driving home from my friend's house. It was late, though I couldn't tell you the exact time. If I had to guess, it was probably somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning. My place was about 20 minutes away, not too far, especially since most houses out here were spread out, meaning less traffic. The rain, however, was falling heavily, and the complete lack of streetlights made it incredibly hard to see the road ahead. So, I was driving slower with extra care. About 5 minutes down the road, I pulled up to a traffic light. My light was red, but on the other side of the intersection, a blue car was positioned oddly. Its front end was partially in the intersection, even though its light was green. All its headlights and taillights were on, but it was just sitting there, completely motionless. I couldn't tell if there was something mechanically wrong with it, or maybe the driver had fallen asleep. But my light turned green. I drove forward slowly, carefully maneuvering around the stationary vehicle. I tried to discreetly look into their car as I passed, but the rain on my window distorted most of my view. Only a moment after passing them and driving down the road again, I saw the blue car's headlights flicker in my rearview mirror. It had turned and started following me. So, it wasn't broken down after all. A cold feeling, a prickle of unease, started to spread through my chest. I kept my eye on the mirrors, checking them constantly. I wouldn't consider myself a paranoid person, but the situation felt strangely staged, almost too deliberate. Another minute passed, and the car's headlights started getting brighter in my mirrors. They were pulling their car closer, much closer, until it felt like they were only a couple of feet from my back bumper. In weather like this, with the rain and poor visibility, that made me incredibly uncomfortable. It was dangerous. I looked back at the road ahead, trying to focus, but then a small, unwelcome light popped up on my dashboard. It was the signal for low tire pressure. A common signal, sure, but it felt like an incredibly odd time for it to suddenly appear, given the car practically glued to my bumper. I looked back in my mirrors. The blue car was still tailing me, so close that their headlights almost made it hard to even see the actual car itself through the glare. I was just 4 or 5 minutes away from home now, nearing the entrance to my neighborhood, when my dashboard flickered again. A new signal, flashing angrily. Flat tire. My stomach dropped. A sudden, sickening realization washed over me. The second I saw that signal, all the scattered pieces of the situation snapped together in my mind. I was almost 100% sure that the car behind me had done something. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I drove for another minute, desperately hoping to make it closer to home, but I could feel my car sinking to the left. The steering became heavy, and I could practically feel the road through the rims now. The tire was completely gone. I had no choice. I had to pull over. The car behind me did the exact same thing. As soon as I parked, It pulled up directly behind me, its headlights still blinding in my mirror. I should have called someone, anyone, as soon as I parked. But I was so consumed with concern and focused on what the person behind me was doing that the thought didn't even cross my mind. Though, even if I had called someone, it probably wouldn't have prevented what happened next. Once my car was completely stopped, 3 doors from the blue car opened. 3 figures emerged, cloaked in the dark and the rain. I only had a few seconds to prepare and react, but I was helpless, defenseless. They ran up to my car, 2 on my side, 1 on the other. One of the men came right up to my window, his face obscured by the rain, yelling at me to open the door. He was pointing a gun directly at me. It happened so fast, a blur of motion and terror. I was in some kind of dazed state, my mind struggling to catch up with the reality. I started to reach for the door handle, my hand trembling, but then the man by the back door smashed something against the window. The glass shattered inwards, spraying me with tiny, sharp pieces. He reached his hand in through the broken window and yanked open the back door. They were all still yelling, both at me and at each other, their voices harsh and demanding. The man in the back reached across, opening the other back door, then reached further, stretching his arm in front of me and unlatched my door. I was still just sitting there, my hands now raised in a gesture of surrender, trying to show them I wasn't a threat. I knew there was no way out of this, even if I had a weapon. Once my door was opened, the man with the gun pulled me out of the car. He slammed me onto the wet ground. The oddest, most surreal thing about that moment was that while I was on the ground, looking out into the cold, rainy pavement, all I was thinking about was how cold and wet the pavement was against my skin. Not about the gun being pushed into the back of my head, or that I was being robbed and beaten. I think it was my mind's desperate attempt to distance myself from the terrifying, traumatizing situation I was in, to find something, anything, else to focus on. I wasn't on the ground for long before the men by the car called out, a sharp, urgent command. The guy holding me down hit me hard in the back of the head, causing my head to ricochet off the pavement. I wasn't even sure if he hit me with the gun or just his fist, because by then I was already numb. I'm surprised it didn't knock me out, but somehow I stayed conscious. I heard their car doors close, then the sound of their engine. They drove away quickly, leaving me alone in the rain. I rolled over, still in a daze, and slowly tried to pick myself up. They had taken my phone, so I was forced to drive my car home, dragging it on its ruined rims, and call the police when I finally got there. My rims were completely dented and damaged beyond repair anyway. The investigation went nowhere. The police could only determine that the suspects had purposefully placed small tire spikes in the road at the intersection where I had crossed them. I was lucky to have only hit one spike, and lucky for it to have caused less damage than usual. They likely planned to ambush me as soon as I hit the trap, but in the end, my reaching the flat tire signal before they could act didn't make much difference. The whole experience left a deep scar. For weeks, every time I drove, I felt a tremor of fear. Every traffic light, every car behind me, made me nervous. The feeling of being targeted, of being so completely vulnerable, stayed with me. I still drive, but the open road, especially at night, no longer feels like a place of freedom, but a place of potential ambush, a chilling reminder of that calculated, terrifying night. I am 24 years old. Up until 3 months ago, I lived alone with my dog, Bear, in a cozy townhome. I had moved in when I turned 22, having found a decent enough job that allowed me to afford my own place. I loved a home. It was the first place I'd ever rented for myself, a symbol of my independence. But 2 years of happy, peaceful living were brutally ruined by one terrifying night. It was a gloomy evening, the kind where the clouds hang low and heavy, and the rain falls steadily, almost without end. It was my day off from work, so I was sitting comfortably on a soft chair in my living room, scrolling through things on my phone. The time was about 8 in the evening, just an hour before I usually started getting ready for bed. Bear, my dog, had been sitting by the back door for a while, looking outside into the wet gloom. He started whining, a low, persistent sound, then ran up to me, nudging my hand. This was his usual way of communicating to me that he needed to go outside. I got up and let him out, closing the door behind him. Then I stood in the kitchen, listening. Even though it was a townhome, there was a small fence separating the backyards, so I didn't have to worry about Bear running away or anything. Also, I should mention that Bear isn't a large dog at all. He's just fluffy and small, like a little teddy bear. Definitely not a guard dog. Not long after I let him outside, maybe 15 or 20 seconds, I heard him whimper. Then he started barking. It wasn't his usual playful bark. This was clearly a cowering bark, a sound of fear, like he was running away from something that had scared him badly. The sound sent a jolt of alarm through me. I rushed to the back door and looked out, seeing Bear running back towards me, his tail tucked low between his legs. Once he was inside, I leaned my head outside the door, scanning the backyard. I expected to see a coyote or some other animal lurking by the fence, but there was nothing there. The yard was empty. I made sure Bear was okay, comforting him, and then I locked my door, securing the deadbolt. He never does anything like that, never barks with such fear, so his reaction made me truly worried for him. I decided to let him sit on my lap for the rest of the night, trying to calm him. For the next 30 minutes, he was constantly perking his head up, staring intently at different windows and doors around the house, one after another, as if he saw something I couldn't. Then, after about 45 minutes of sitting there, Bear suddenly turned his head and stared at the window directly behind me. He lowered his ears, his body tensed and started to growl, a low rumbling sound deep in his chest. "Bear, what is it?" I whispered, turning slowly to look where he was looking. And right there, in the window, just a couple of feet from us, was a man. He was staring directly back at me, his face almost pressed against the cold glass. I jumped up, a scream tearing from my throat, stepping backwards away from the window. The man, startled by my scream, immediately turned and sprinted away, disappearing down the side of the house into the rain. Bear started barking furiously now, adding to the sudden chaos and fear in the room. I quickly closed the blinds on that window, my hands trembling. Then I went around the house, checking all the other windows and blinds, making sure they were all securely closed. From the quick glimpse I got, I didn't recognize the man at all. I had no idea who he was, or what he was doing here, or why he was staring at me like that. I tried to listen for any more indications that he was still around, but the heavy rain outside was too loud, covering up any possible sounds. Bear seemed calmer now, perhaps because the blinds were closed, so I stayed up for a while longer just to be safe. Then I went upstairs and had Bear sleep in my room with me, something he usually didn't do. It took a long time for me to fall asleep. My mind raced, replaying the man's face at the window, Bear's strange behavior, the chilling questions of why and who. After an hour or so, I slowly dozed off, my sleep light and restless. When I woke up, Bear was standing up straight by the bedroom door, staring intently at it. This was a truly freaky thing to see, waking up in the middle of the night to my dog frozen in that position. But not even a few seconds later, I heard something below me, a man talking. His voice was low, but clear enough to make out. And not long after, I heard another man on the other side of the house talking back. Their footsteps were loud. They didn't even seem to be whispering. It was like they didn't care if I knew that they were inside my home. My bedroom door was locked, but I had nowhere else to go. I crept over to Bear, quietly trying to keep him calm, then picked him up. I went over to the corner of my room behind the bed, where I felt the most hidden. It took me a while to realize it, but then it struck me that I hadn't heard any noises at all in the past minute. No steps, no voices. The silence was almost more terrifying than the sounds. This was when I took my phone out and called the police, whispering as softly as I possibly could. As I told the operator my address and explained what was happening, Bear started a low growl again, then began barking and whining, his fear mirroring my own. Two sets of footsteps started making their way up the stairs. heavy and deliberate. I begged the operator to send someone immediately. The two men started talking to each other again, their voices muffled but closer now. It was hard to make out their exact words, but I heard one of them speak more clearly. "Hey, we just want to talk. We're not here to hurt you." I screamed back, my voice cracking. "I called the cops." "Leave." I was panicking, not knowing what else to do, trapped in my room. There was a pause afterwards. A heavy silence, broken only by Bear's whimpers. Then, one of the men said, "We're here to help you." I didn't respond, busy trying to muffle my crying against Bear's fur. "Open the door," another voice commanded. It got quiet again. I could only hear them breathing heavily behind the door for what felt like a whole minute before one of them walked back down the stairs. I couldn't tell where they went downstairs, or if they'd left the house or not, but I was sure that it was just one set of footsteps that had left the bedroom door. It was so quiet now, I couldn't hear any breathing. Then, in the far distance, the soft sound of sirens began to get louder. A sense of safety, of fragile hope, was finally coming back to me. Once the sirens grew closer, I heard footsteps running out of the house downstairs. But now I was unsure about where the other man was. It seemed really unlikely for him to be by my door still, but I could have sworn I had never heard him leave. The thought chilled me. I waited for the police cars to pull up and for the officers to make their way inside. I heard them searching downstairs, their voices low and professional. Then they slowly made their way upstairs and knocked on my bedroom door. I almost didn't want to answer, still clinging to the terrifying thought that the other man had to be somewhere nearby, hiding. When I opened the door, though, it was just an officer, his face concerned. I immediately told him about my concerns, about the second man. He directed me out of the house, ushering me downstairs, as one of his partners continued searching upstairs. But nobody else was found. The only thing they were able to find was watery footprints all around the house, just like the ones I had seen, as well as an unlocked window on the first floor. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I had kept that particular window locked or not. It terrified me though, feeling so confident that the other man was still there, never hearing him leave, but then there being no trace of him. It made it impossible to sleep at night, having this pervasive feeling of someone still in the house, watching me. I moved out 3 months ago. It was too much stress on my mind, having a loose end like that, especially since neither of them were ever identified or arrested. There was no clear intention the men had either, which is just another question added to the list of uncertainty. Even now, living miles away in a new apartment, I still sometimes feel like I'm not alone, like the presence of an unseen watcher lingers just beyond my sight. I work at a convenience store, the kind you see on the corner of a small shopping strip. It's basically a smaller, local version of a larger chain, like a 7-Eleven. For a while, I worked the morning shifts, which started at 3 in the morning and ended at 1 in the afternoon. I actually agreed to these shifts because they were always the slowest, requiring the least amount of actual work. My job duties included tending to customers, filling the shelves, and taking out the trash. Most of the time, that meant I had nothing at all to do. It was the middle of winter when this happened, but I live in a warmer state, so it usually rains instead of snows. On this particular morning, it was a light pour outside, but it was enough to keep most people away from the store. On early mornings like these, I like to lean against the front of the building outside and smoke a cigarette to pass the time. I wasn't supposed to, but there wasn't anyone there to stop me. Along the shopping strip were maybe 8 or 9 other stores, all connected to ours. All of them were stores with normal business hours, so none of them were ever open until around 6 or 7 in the morning. So, when I saw a car pull into the parking lot while I was smoking outside, I naturally assumed they were coming to the convenience store. I quickly stubbled out my cigarette and tossed it in the trash, then headed back inside and around the counter. There really was nothing to do, so I was just waiting for the customer to come in and leave so I could get back to being bored alone. After a few minutes of nobody coming in though, I walked back around the counter and checked outside the front door. The car was still there, parked in a space nearby, but its headlights were off. As far as I could tell, nobody was inside. Again, it was lightly raining outside, and all the other stores were still closed. So I was a bit confused as to where they went. It was very strange. I took one last look around, seeing nobody, then closed the door and went back inside, still wondering about the car. 30 more minutes of nothing went by. I think I was just standing in the same spot behind the counter for the whole time, completely spacing out. I checked the time, realizing I'd only been at work for a little over an hour. I decided I should check the trash cans around the store and toss them in the dumpster out back. It would at least be something to do. I walked around to each trash bin, pulling out the full bags and putting them into a small cart. Then I replaced each with a new empty bag. As I was doing this, I heard a faint clicking sound come from outside. It sounded like something snapping or breaking, but between the rain hitting the roof and the sound being somewhat far away, it was impossible to tell what it was or where exactly it came from. In that moment, though, I barely even thought about it. It just didn't seem like anything worth thinking about. Just another random sound these old buildings often made. Once I had filled the cart with all the trash bags, I rolled it into the back room and unlocked the back door that led to the dumpster. I sighed, seeing that the rain was pouring down harder now. Of course, right when I actually needed to go outside. Regardless, I pushed the cart through the heavy rain and over to the dumpster, which was directly across from the door. After tossing in all the trash, I turned back and started heading for my store door. But then I noticed something was out of place. The store directly connected to mine, the one right next door, had its back door wedged open. I'd never seen anyone there earlier than 6 in the morning. Not ever. The sight made me pause. I went back inside my store to get out of the rain, then walked out to the front door and looked at the other store's front door. All the lights were off inside, and it looked locked up and empty, just like it always was at this time of night. I thought for a few more minutes, a growing sense of unease starting to prickle at me. Finally, I figured I had nothing better to do, and a strange curiosity took hold. I went back outside by the dumpster and walked up to the open door of the neighboring store. Again, all the lights were off inside. The open door seemed to lead into a small, dark closet-type room, which then had another door at the back, probably leading to the main storeroom. I stepped inside, standing in between the doorway, not wanting to make it seem like I was trying to sneak in or something. Standing inside now, out of the rain, I could clearly hear someone moving around in the other room. Footsteps, the sound of drawers opening, things being shifted. It sounded like they were making a mess, which then got me thinking even more. Hey, is everything okay in there? I called out, hoping to get a reassuring response from a neighboring store worker, maybe someone who had come in early. The noises stopped immediately. The sudden silence was deafening. I waited a few seconds, my heart beginning to pound, before I realized that this was not normal at all. Something was definitely wrong. I stepped back outside and into the rain, quickly making my way back to my store. As I rushed away, I recognized something was missing from the door I had just left. It took a second to figure it out, but then I saw it. There was no handle on the other store's back door. It was just an empty hole where the handle and lock usually are. Then I looked down at the wedge that was holding the door open, seeing now that it was actually the broken door handle itself. A wave of pure terror washed over me. I ran back into my store, slamming my back door shut and locking all the doors as fast as I could. Then I called 911, as well as my store manager, my voice trembling. Once I knew they were on their way, I went up to the wall connecting our stores and put my ear against it, listening to the suspected robbery taking place. Whoever it was had to have known that I called the police, because they were moving quickly now. I could hear them running all around, tossing or knocking things over in a frantic hurry. After about 30 seconds to a minute of this frantic activity, I saw lights flash outside and heard sirens approaching the back of the building. The footsteps quickly moved to the very back of the store before a bunch of loud yelling came, which I assumed was the officers confronting the person. I cautiously checked out the back door after another minute or so, seeing a less hectic scene. I walked out to talk to the officers. I thanked them for coming so quickly and gave them a statement of what I had seen and heard. The man who was arrested was found with a pillowcase filled with nearly $6,000 worth of stolen items. He also had an empty firearm along with a variety of tools used to break down doors and locks. Unbeknownst to me, he'd also broken into the store 2 spots down the strip as well. It's unclear whether or not the man knew I was working at the time, but my store lights were on, so it isn't likely that he would have intentionally broken into my store first. But several large scratches were found on the back of our door handle, which may have been from a previous unsuccessful attempt. The thought still makes my blood run cold. I was so close, so very close to having my own store broken into, to confronting a man with a gun. That night, the quiet, boring shift turned into a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk just beyond the thin walls of my workplace. I still work those morning shifts, but now I never lean against the front of the building. I stay inside, constantly checking the locks, a new, unsettling vigilance always present in my mind. This happened a little under 2 years ago. Back then, I lived in a small 2-story townhouse. I worked remotely from home, so my days were mostly spent in quiet solitude, tapping away on my laptop. The place had a small kitchen and living room on the first floor, and 2 bedrooms on the second. One of those rooms I used as my office. During this time, the unit connected to mine, the one I shared a wall with, was vacant. Nobody lived there, and no one had moved in for over 3 months. It had been completely silent. This night, I was working pretty late. It was rainy and cloudy outside, so I didn't have much else to do. I decided to use the extra time to get ahead on work stuff. I sat in the office, focused on my laptop, for a good few hours. The house was quiet, as usual, with only the soft, rhythmic sounds of the rain outside trickling against the roof. I think it was just about 8 in the evening when, between the quiet clicking of my keyboard, I heard a distinct thump on the wall right next to me. I looked over, a bit confused. Then I heard it again, a solid thump, clear despite the rain. This was on the shared wall with the vacant unit, so naturally, it was kind of odd. After a few seconds of thinking, I rationalized it. It must have been the owner checking up on something, maybe doing some maintenance, or perhaps prepping the unit for a tour in the morning. Regardless, I dismissed it and continued working. Over the course of the next hour or so, I continued to hear random sounds from the other unit. Creaks, thumps, and various other similar noises. Oddly, they were spread out, not continuous. Like I'd hear one distinct creak, then several minutes would pass before I'd hear anything else. It was sporadic, almost as if someone was moving very slowly or pausing a lot. Then, at just about 9:30, I heard a door suddenly creak open and then push closed. This sound was louder than all the other noises I'd been hearing throughout the night, which immediately made me feel uneasy. It had been months since I'd heard the sound of the other unit's door open and close, so I didn't actually know how loud or quiet it usually was. But this felt too close, too distinct. After a minute, the silence from the other unit returned. I decided to take a break and leave the office. I headed downstairs, my heart a little quicker than usual, just to make sure everything was good. I looked out the window next to the front door, seeing if maybe the owner's car was out there, but I didn't see anything. Nothing parked on the driveway, and nothing on the road. Also, while I was down there, I didn't hear a single noise from the other unit. I figured whoever it was must have already left, and so, hopefully, all the strange noises were done for the night. After checking out the front door and double-checking it was locked, I went right back upstairs to my office. I wasn't sure how much longer I really wanted to work. At this point, I was feeling pretty tired and kind of just wanted to chill in bed for the rest of the night. But I told myself I'd do 30 more minutes. I closed the door to my office, sat down at my desk, and got as much done as I could during that half hour. I never noticed any more of those sounds coming from the vacant unit, just the calm rain still trickling down outside. Finally, feeling good about the work I'd gotten done, and feeling my eyelids getting heavy, I shut off my laptop and headed out of the office. I turned off the hallway lights and walked into my bedroom. I started getting myself ready for bed when a sudden eerie and ominous sound echoed through the walls of the house. Someone was whistling. It was a slow, soft tune, almost mournful, but clear and incredibly close. I stood there silently, frozen, listening for a few moments. I guess I was in shock of what I was hearing and how completely out of nowhere it came from. My heart began to pound in my chest. I quietly walked up to my bedroom door and cracked it open a sliver. As soon as I did, I could hear it much more clearly. It felt like it was too loud to be from the other unit, or even from outside. It was inside my house. Feeling really unsettled, a deep dread washing over me, I started walking slowly down the hallway, each step deliberate and quiet. The whistling persisted, filling the quiet halls of the house with the eerie tune. I made my way down the steps, carefully, silently, and moved toward the back of the house where I could clearly hear the sound coming from. I peered around the corner into the living room. In the dark, unlit room, a man was sitting in one of my chairs. He was facing the other way, toward the black television screen, continuing to whistle his tune. He stared into the pitch-black room and barely moved. I could only see the general outline of him, a dark silhouette against the faint light from the rain outside. But I could see his hand that was resting on the armrest, and it looked like it had something small in it, like a small handgun. A cold wave of terror washed over me. I knew he had to have known I was inside, and probably heard me sneaking downstairs. Yet he never looked back. He just stared forward, whistling that unsettling tune. It was incredibly disturbing, deeply unnatural. I didn't know whether to say something or to try to sneak away. Why was he even here? How did he even get in? What did he want? My heart was beating faster and faster, a frantic drum against my ribs. After what felt like an eternity, I made a sudden, desperate decision. I had to run out of the house. I swung open the front door, the sound loud in the quiet house, still hearing the man continue whistling his tune as I ran out into the rainy night. I only looked back once over my shoulder as I sprinted down the street. I didn't see him follow, but I did notice the door to the other unit, the vacant one, was now wide open. I got to the end of the road, soaked and shaking, and called for help. When the police got there, they could hear, even from outside, that same eerie tune being whistled from inside my house. They approached carefully, their flashlights cutting through the rain. They made their way down to the living room and found the man sitting in the exact same position I had seen him in. They said he turned his head slightly to look at them, giving a short, crooked smile, then dropped his gun and let them arrest him. He basically spoke nothing of what he was doing or had planned to do, or why he was there. Some of the officers I talked to thought he might have been trying to get arrested for some reason, but strangely, there was no information on the guy, no matching fingerprints, no identification of any kind. And without him being cooperative, they had no way to find out who he really was, or if he had any kind of mental illness that could be behind all of it. I don't know what other ways that night could have gone down, but even thinking about other possibilities makes me profoundly uneasy. Every once in a while, though, I still hear that same eerie tune being whistled in the middle of my dreams, making me wake up in a panic, my heart pounding, thinking he could be back, sitting in my living room, waiting. The memory is a cold, lingering shadow that refuses to fade. I was 16 years old. At the time, I lived in a small home with my parents, sort of on the outskirts of the city. It was in a small, wooded neighborhood, about an hour outside of the main city area where both of my parents worked. This was on a regular weekday. It had been pretty cloudy and rainy all day, and everyone was talking about this big storm that was supposedly rolling in later that night. I didn't care too much, so long as I didn't have to walk home in it. Thankfully, it waited until school was out and for me to get home before the rain started picking up. Usually, these storms are over-exaggerated, but as I watched TV in the living room with the windows open, the clouds got darker and darker. Then the rain got a lot worse. But honestly, the most unsettling thing was the wind. Our small, old, and basically wooden house was creaking and swaying as the wind slammed against it, and rain crashed against the roof. Regardless, I was sure everything was good, and kind of just listened to the storm as I watched TV and waited for my parents to get home. At about 5:30 though, my phone alarm suddenly screamed at me. It was a flash flood warning. Not too much later, my mom called. She said a bunch of the roads on the way home were apparently flooded over, and that it was too dangerous for them to drive in, so they'd have to wait it out. I told her I was good here, and the house seemed to be holding up, so it wasn't a big deal. Now knowing that my parents were stuck in the city, I got up and found something to eat in the kitchen. As I waited for my meal to heat up in the microwave, I thought I heard something that sounded like a knock, like something knocking on wood. It was so muffled by all the rain and wind that it was hard to tell. I thought if it was anything, it was probably just something the wind was smacking against the house. So, I ignored it. I grabbed my food and moved back over to the couch to watch TV. But before I could even start eating, I heard it again. This time, it kind of freaked me out because it sounded like it was at the front door. The front door was pretty much right next to me, and it was the exact same knocking pattern as the one I thought I'd heard when I was in the kitchen. Obviously, this made me think it had to be a person, but who would be outside in this raging storm? That really didn't make any sense. I was too scared for a minute to even check out the door. So, I kind of just sat frozen on the couch and waited for something to happen. But when nothing did, I finally got up and went over to check out the door. I walked up to the door and looked out the peephole. It was mostly fogged over, blurry with condensation and rain. All I could see were the blurry shapes of heavy rain pouring down. I looked out there for a while, making sure I didn't see any figures move or something, but with no signs of anything, I felt safe enough to slowly open the door. At first, I was relieved. Nobody was there. It was just the monstrous storm outside, the wind howling, the rain thrashing. But then I noticed something weird. In the mud leading up to the porch, there were clear footsteps. I couldn't actually make out the shoe print or anything, but it was clear by the repeating pattern through the mud that they were definitely footsteps. And given the weather, they had to be recent, to not have been washed away already. I felt a chill run through my body, a cold, creeping dread, before I abruptly closed the door, pulling it tight and locking it. I was really freaked out and really didn't know what to do. The rational side of me wanted to call my parents, or maybe even the police, because this was truly strange, with a massive storm going on and me being alone. But the other side of me didn't want to worry anyone over something that was hopefully nothing. I mean, they weren't on the porch now, so they must have already left. At least, that was my thought process at the time. I stayed more alert, my senses heightened, but refrained from calling anyone yet. I told myself if I saw or heard anything else though, I'd call. I went back to the couch and ate my dinner, keeping the TV volume a bit lower so I could listen to the storm. Honestly, I don't remember much else from that part of the night, because at some point, I just laid down and passed out, completely exhausted, waiting for my parents to get home. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't sure why I'd woken up, but the whole house was dark. The storm was just as loud as it was earlier, if not more so. I knew a while had passed though, and I was curious how I'd been able to sleep so long without my parents coming home and waking me up. I picked up my phone and checked the time, but immediately saw I had multiple missed calls and unread texts from my parents. They were just asking if I was okay, and said the roads were still too bad to drive in, and they had to get a hotel in the city for the night. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, not really processing any of the texts I read, just trying to wake up still. And then I heard probably the most terrifying sound I could have heard in that moment. It was a single footstep. A distinct, heavy footstep on the wooden floor right above me. Not something hitting the house or wind making the house creak. It was unmistakably a footstep inside the house, specifically in my bedroom, which was the room directly above me. My heart started racing as I listened for another few seconds. I followed the sound of the footsteps, staring intently at the ceiling as they slowly moved through my room. Then they started going toward the door, into the upstairs hallway. I knew I had to act fast. I turned my phone on silent and quickly, ran into the small downstairs bathroom in the main hallway. I kept the lights off and carefully closed the door behind me, locking it with a soft click. I don't think they heard me. I opened my phone and turned the brightness on the lowest setting as I called 911. It was pitch black in there, aside from the dim phone screen. Once I saw that the call timer had started, meaning an operator answered, I whispered my name, my address, and what was happening. Then I went back to staying quiet, holding my breath while keeping the call going. I was afraid to even put my phone on the quietest volume to let me hear the operator, especially as I began hearing the footsteps making their way down the stairs. The low thumps slowly moved through the hallway. The sound of the rain and wind filled the silence between each heavy step. They walked right past the bathroom door. My body was rigid, pressed against the cold wall. They kept on, continuing through the hallway until they got to the kitchen. And then a few seconds passed as I waited for the next footstep. And then a few more seconds passed. Before I knew it, I was just waiting for any more sounds, or for them to move, but I didn't hear anything. The house fell silent again, save for the storm. Several long, agonizing minutes passed. Each second felt like an hour. I heard nothing. Then, a sudden loud bang at the front door sounded, and police called out. I ran out of the bathroom and opened the front door, relief washing over me. But it was apparent by the lack of any other sounds inside the house that the intruder was gone. The sliding back door was cracked open, leaving the eerie evidence of their absence. Likely, the sound of them breaking inside was completely drowned out by the heavy storm, keeping me asleep. However, that could actually be the reason that I'm still here today. Whoever the intruder was seen to only go through the hallway upstairs and into my bedroom. So, me staying asleep on the couch and not making myself known was probably for the best. Disturbingly though, it seems clear that they were looking for me. What's really unnerving to think about, even today, years later, is that I never saw the person. So, I literally know nothing about them. Whether they're a man or woman, teenager or adult, someone I knew or someone I didn't know. Or worse, someone that I didn't know but that knew me. My parents and I have been pretty on edge for the last few years, hoping whoever it was doesn't attempt to come back to continue whatever they had planned for that night. Every sound at night makes my heart jump, a chilling reminder of the unknown presence that once walked through my home. Alone in a pretty quiet, cozy neighborhood, nestled in a suburban town just outside of a small city. I'd been there for several years and really had no issues with it. I knew most of my neighbors, at least to wave to, and felt like our town was just truly quiet and calm. Nothing much ever happened, and I was able to just live my life in peace. This particular incident happened in the middle of spring. I had just gotten out of work after a long, grueling 12-hour shift, driving home in the dark around 9 in the evening. The roads were empty, and the neighborhood was still and dark, as most people had been hunkered down inside from the pouring rain for the past several days now. It was relentless. I pulled into my driveway, parked my car, and went inside. I started warming up some leftovers in the oven, and then rested on the couch, settling in for what I hoped would be a peaceful night. Only about 10 minutes after I'd gotten home, though, there was a rather loud, sharp knock at the front door. I was really put off by it. Unsure who it could be or what it could be for, I got up and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a man standing on my porch. He had a black rain jacket on and looked completely drenched, water dripping from his hood. I slowly opened the door, leaving the security chain on. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, my voice cautious. The man looked at me for a moment. His eyes were droopy, almost heavy-lidded, like he was very tired, and his face was stiff and motionless, completely devoid of expression. He looked a bit older than me, maybe in his early 30s, with a dark beard and longish brown hair, thoroughly soaked by the rain. Finally, he answered, speaking slowly and without much emotion, his voice a low monotone. He explained that his dog had jumped his fence, and he wanted to know if I'd seen it running around. I told him, no, I haven't seen anything, genuinely. He nodded in an understanding way, but his eyes wandered past me and into my house, scanning the dimly lit hallway. Then he slowly turned away and walked off the porch. I closed the door, pulling the security chain back into place. I thought the guy was kind of weird, but maybe he was just really tired and frustrated, especially with all this happening at night and in such rainy weather. I hoped he'd find his dog soon though, and aside from that, I went back to the couch and tried to forget about it, figuring it was just a strange but harmless encounter. I want to say I was sitting there watching TV for maybe 15 minutes before there was a sudden, insistent knock at the front door again. Immediately, my stomach tightened. I was sure it was the same guy, but I had no idea why he'd come back. I got up feeling very confused and also somewhat concerned. Sure enough, when I looked out, I saw the same guy standing behind the door, his silhouette dark against the rainy night. I opened it again, but this time I wasn't quite as friendly, just straight up asking him what he wanted. He had that same cold, emotionless look as before. The man pointed vaguely toward the side of my house and said he saw his dog run into my backyard. He asked if he could go look around back there. The way he said it was kind of strange though, a flat, almost demanding tone. I'm not sure how to explain it, but yeah, something was clearly not right about his manner. To get him off my back, and in case he was actually telling the truth, I said, "Sure, you can go back there and look around." He said, "Thank you." But at the same time as I was starting to close the door, he took a step forward, almost like he thought I was going to let him inside to lead him through the house to my back door. I just continued closing the door though, firmly. I'm not sure why he would have thought that when he could easily just walk around the house and to my backyard. I looked out the living room window to make sure he left, and he did, slowly walking around to the side of my house. After all of that though, I wasn't too comfortable with the guy just wandering around my property. So I went to the kitchen, which had a large glass back door, so I could watch him. I didn't want to stare at him through the door or anything, but I decided to clean up some stuff on the counters, while occasionally looking back at what he was up to. Every time I looked, it seemed like he was just slowly walking around the perimeter of the yard, his head down, as if searching. Then, one time, I looked back, and his face was right there, right behind the glass, looking in at me. It literally made me jump back, startled by his sudden appearance. I yelled through the glass, my voice high-pitched, asking what he wanted. He called out, his voice a bit louder now, asking if his dog was inside my house. What the hell was wrong with this guy? I sternly said no, clearly showing that I was getting impatient and angry with him. But the man kept asking, wanting me to let him in the house to look around for his dog. He'd bang on the door every time I wouldn't answer, a loud, heavy thud against the glass. I could see it in his face that he was getting unnervingly angry at the fact that I wouldn't let him in. His eyes seemed to darken, and his mouth was a tight, hard line. It was getting kind of horrifying, this increasingly aggressive behavior. As he kept hitting the door and yelling at me, I finally, desperately, called the police. Only then, once he saw me take my phone out and hold it up, did he finally stop and leave. He simply turned and walked away, vanishing into the rain as quickly as he had appeared. That only made it more suspicious as to what he was truly up to. The police came and took a report from me, asking what happened and what he looked like, and all that sort of stuff. But that's where it was left at. There wasn't much they could do right then and there. However, unfortunately, a week later, there was an incident reported in a neighboring town, really similar to mine. It was unclear if he forced his way in or was just allowed inside by the victims. But the story was almost exactly the same as what happened to me. A man came knocking on their door, looking for his dog, only for it to take an awful, violent turn. That news made me even more disturbed by that night. The man came by my place, doing the exact same thing. Had I listened to him, or been any more willing to help, or perhaps been caught off guard, I could have suffered a similar terrible fate to the others. The thought still chills me to the bone. A persistent, cold fear that lingers every time I hear a knock at my door when it's raining outside. My quiet, peaceful neighborhood no longer feels quite as safe.